It is night outside. A man heard a child crying coming from his yard. He thought that burglars had broken into his house. Taking an axe, he went to the barn to check where the noise was coming from, but there was no one there but the horses. Since he found out that he and his wife could not have children, he began to hear phantom sounds. The man looked to his right and noticed a small bundle in the hay. He picked it up and it turned out to be a baby. Olena, his wife, came to the bed and asked what had happened. She was sleepy and did not immediately see what her husband was holding in his hands. She was surprised to see the baby, but they decided to keep it and raise it as their own. At that moment, something magical happened. When he opened his eyes and waved his hand, a wind suddenly blew, gathering clouds. Soon it started to rain. The dry land became fertile, and the villagers sang happy songs. He also protected the village from danger, and thanks to his mystical powers, peace reigned everywhere. No one suffered from hunger and thirst anymore. But he did not stop his research for the sake of the people of the village. He considered such abilities to be magical, so they called him Charnul. 12 years passed. The boy who was found in the barn grew up. He was named Arian Chiron. His father, Arian Vincent, had just finished chopping wood in the yard, and they were about to go home for dinner. The boy asked his father how to use magic. Vincent was surprised by this question. He didn't remember giving the boy a book about it. Chiron asked his father if he had anything magical, but shooting down a bear with one arrow or knocking down a tree with just a swing of an axe was hardly magic. On their way home, they passed through a field where other children were playing. Two boys saw the father and son and started talking about how Chiron was always reading books, even when they wanted to play. He probably doesn't even know how to read. The boy is so thin and doesn't look like Uncle Vincent. One of the boy's mothers told him that Chiron had been picked up somewhere. Perhaps his own parents had thrown him away. Vincent heard the boys talking and was very annoyed because the boy was like his own son. The father promised Chiron to take him to the city tomorrow and buy his favorite fruit. He didn't care what anyone else said. Chiron is his son. The boy thought only about magic and wanted to learn more about it. The next day, they went to the local city of the Kingdom of Tormia, Creas. Vincent asked the boy to wait for him in his grandfather Martin's shop while he finished his business. The man reminded Chiron that he should not go into dark alleys and encounter aristocrats, but the boy always obeyed his father. The father left, and the boy helped Grandpa Martin sign the vegetable plates. The boy was happy to help, even though he could have just sat next to him. Grandpa admired Chiron's intelligence. He believed that the boy was smart beyond his age. The boy interrupted his grandfather's thoughts by asking if he knew anything about magic and how to use it, but the grandfather knew nothing about it, only told the boy that there were many books about it nearby and pointed to a bookstore. Chiron ran to the store without even waiting for his grandfather to let him. The grandfather took Chiron's book thinking it was a fairy tale, but when he opened the book, there were no fairy tales in it. Meanwhile, Chiron was already in the bookstore. As soon as he wanted to take one in his hands, a woman came up and said that she could not touch their books with dirty hands. Expensive books are not meant for peasants. They are not the kind of books sold in ordinary stores. A man came into the store and the woman turned her attention to him. She was making some kind of prayer to him and had to check if he had brought everything. Chiron looked at the books and couldn't understand where his father buys them because they were so expensive. While the woman was away from him, the boy took advantage of the moment and took one of the books, but there was no valuable information in it. When Chiron came out of the bookstore, he saw a man carrying a lot of books in a box. He ran after him and saw a huge pile of books near the fence, and then the boy realized where his father had taken the books for him. A man came up to the boy and said that this was not a place where children could walk alone. That behind that gate was an aristocratic neighborhood and asked where the boy's parents were. Another man came up and said that the boy looked strange and probably did not live in this city. Maybe he was an orphan or was sent by bandits. As soon as the man took Chiron by the jacket and told him to come with them, the boy disappeared and there was no trace of him. While the boy was hiding behind the fence, he heard a man saying that the topic of discussion would be what magic is. Another voice asked to show the principal how to shoot fire. The man made a condition that if the students answered the question correctly, he would show them a little magic. He asked what ability is needed to learn it. The boy began to think about what the answer could be, and no one answered. The man realized that none of the students would give an answer and said that the most important thing in the study of magic is called insight. The strange feeling they are experiencing now is insight. There was a time when people did not know that 1 + 1 = 2. Many scientists have worked hard to prove this, but they could not understand without intricate research that 1 + 1 = 2, because this rule has existed in the world since the beginning, in addition to studying and knowing, feeling the concept in general. Because magic has also always existed, they have the ability to accept and understand it through insight. So they are more accurate than knowledge and faster than effort. If you hone your talent, you can become a wizard like that. Chiron was very surprised that there was a possibility of becoming a Charnul, and the principal replied that there was a child standing behind the wall. The boy was confused by the fact that a man was reading his thoughts and did not know what to do. Suddenly he had a thought. If he does not climb over this wall now, he will regret it forever. He saw a man with a beard sitting by a tree and students sitting in a circle around him. This man is Mirya Alpheus, the director of the Alpheus Academy of Magic, a certified 4th-level magician. After looking at the boy's appearance, the students began to shout that he was not an aristocrat, but a commoner, and should not be here. But the principal did not expel Chiron. He asked him what exactly interested the boy so much. He said that he wanted to see magic because he had only read about it in books, but had never seen it with his own eyes. The boy bowed and asked to see something. It was important for him to see what magic was. The principal raised his hand and said he would show him a spell that created wind. In a moment, Chiron and all the students took off. They were in the air for several minutes. Chiron liked flying very much, but in a moment he started to pitch sharply and got very scared. The principal laughed and said that this was magic, but the boy didn't understand what magic was, started crying and asked him to just tell the truth. The students were very surprised that the boy was so rude to the principal. Even teachers don't talk like that. But the principal was not affected. He was going to explain much more complicated things. Magic operates beyond common sense. It is a mental process that explores the truth of reality. Sharon realized that if it is very difficult to make magic irrational, it is actually closer to the truth. Many ideas of great people were considered irrational and denied, but eventually they were recognized as new truth. Maybe that's why truth is hidden in irrationality. The director agreed with the boy's opinion. He asked Mirya Alpheus what he needed to do to study magic. The principal thought that he was a brilliant child. Despite the difficulties, he tries to get the right information to study it on his own and really believes that he will succeed. But he is a commoner, and instead of explaining, he decided to show him. The director asked the girl named Shuamin to enter a state of mind. When she did, the principal took the coins in his hand and asked her to guess the number of coins. Shuamin said 6, and it was correct. When a magician focuses, his mind becomes so sensitive that he can feel everything around him. It is said that great magicians even have the ability to count the number of leaves on a tree from a distance. This is an overly sensitive mental state, a state of mind. Shuamin said that now the director has 3 coins in his hand. A magician who enters this state sees the outside world using supernatural potential and can eventually control reality. It's not about counting the number of coins. It's the ability to immediately feel the integrity of the situation in front of them. Anyone can do this. The director told the boy to practice in a quiet city, first to feel himself, and then to erase. If he succeeds, another world will open up to him. Chiron added that if he did not feel himself, he would not be able to erase himself. The director was very impressed by the boy's mind and suggested that they try right here and now. After all, if they can't enter the state of the spirit, they won't be able to learn magic at all. Chiron closed his eyes and began to feel himself. The reality and the sensations he was experiencing could not be overwhelmed by the brain's representation. He doesn't define them, he feels them. Slowly, one by one, he began to erase the things he felt. He does not begin to feel his existence. Only the mind remains sensual. After a while, the boy opened his eyes. The principal asked him what he felt. The boy said that he heard sound. Mirya Alpheus did not think the boy would make it. Things that happen in the state of spirit are in another dimension. The principal came up to the boy, patted his head and said that he had done a good job, and if he continued to practice, he would be able to hear even more sounds. He gathered all the students and they went to the academy. The lesson was over, and Chiron was left alone and only looked after the student. Mirya Alpheus thought that if the boy had been born a nobleman and trained from an early age, would he have been able to achieve what these children had achieved? Probably yes, because he was very talented. Chiron climbed over the fence and was shocked to see what he had done. He heard a loud sound, so it was not a state of mind. It was as if he was torn to pieces and scattered all over the world. He was the world itself. Chiron began to run. He recalled that for a moment he seemed to have left his body and become infinity. In his thoughts, he did not notice that he was not flying at the man. Chiron fell from the collision and immediately apologized, but the man was not satisfied with what had happened. He took the boy by the shirt and started shouting that paying compensation for the hit and apologizing was not enough. A woman's voice asked what was going on. It was Miss Emmy. She is an aristocrat. The man said that the boy wanted to kill him and he wanted to teach him a lesson. The man hit Sharon and he fell to the ground. The men started shouting that his parents should pay them compensation. Where is his mother, who is hiding after giving birth to such a shameless boy? They continued to kick the boy and call him a fool. Miss Emmy asked them to stop beating him because they could kill him. She went to Chiron and asked him how he was. The boy started to say that he had not done anything to them. The men said they were going to sell the boy in a village in the south. He was a commoner, nothing to worry about. The girl said that slaves should not have any flaws and they needed to make sure of that. The men started shouting for the boy to take off his clothes, but Emmy meant his face, not his body. She was only going to have a little fun with him and then let him go. Chiron plunged into his memories, recalling the words of the director of the Magic Academy. His eyes and everything around him turned blue. The girl saw this and asked the men not to touch the boy. The next moment, all of them flew into the air. except for Chiron. He had unconsciously used a spell that summoned air. A few minutes later, he came to his senses, and all the men started falling to the ground. They broke their arms and received other injuries from falling from a height. Only Emma was able to get down using her strength and not get hurt. She asked who this guy was and where he studied magic because he was just a commoner. Miss Emma said she heard a sound and lifted herself into the air and disappeared. The boy could not understand how she did it, but when he saw the men lying on the ground and not moving, he began to run away quickly. We are now transferred to the Karmas estate, which is a first-class aristocracy. The head of the Karmas family, Shakura, was reading a newspaper and drinking tea. The father asked the girl why she had missed class again. Emma replied that she had already learned everything she could. She was no longer interested. But the father stood his ground. When will this girl grow up, he thought. No matter what her genes are, if she is so irresponsible, she may be caught off guard one day. The girl went up to her room, turned around, and asked her father to introduce her to someone who worked at the Magic Academy. It was winter. Vincent was looking for Chiron, and when he entered the house, he saw only his wife, who told him that the boy had gone to the logging area to collect wood. The father thought it was strange because it was snowing outside, so he decided to go look for him. The man recalled how last spring, when he brought a bicycle to the city for the first time, he almost lost it. And although the boy said he just got lost, it is not known what really happened. As Chiron was chopping down trees, he remembered how he had summoned magic that day. He could not do it again. He had summoned it unconsciously. It is not known what intermediate process was triggered by the insight. After all, he had no knowledge of magic, but he was still able to enter the state of mind. He felt everything when he was in it. The surface, the shape, the smell. He could feel every part of this tree at the same time, but he could not explain it. He could cut down trees with a single blow. That's magic, he thought. At that time, his father was watching the boy, and he was shocked that he could cut down a tree with one blow. Chiron thought it was the first successful time after hundreds of attempts to cut down trees, just like using magic that day. He didn't need accidents. He needed extensive knowledge. Day after day, he decided to practice endlessly for the chance that would one day appear. 3 years passed. It was autumn outside. The leaves had already turned yellow. Chiron continued to cut down trees. After a little meditation, he decided to go home. He didn't notice that 5 hours had passed since he came to the forest. It was as if he had become one with nature. The leaves swaying in the wind, the worms crawling in the ground, the sounds of trees absorbing moisture with their roots. Even 5 hours would not be enough to enjoy it all to the fullest. As Chiron approached his house, he saw 2 white horses and a carriage. He did not know that they would have guests. When he entered the house, his parents and a man were sitting at the table. This man was the family's butler. His name was Temuran. Chiron was very surprised by his visit because the Ogent family is a second-class family of aristocrats in the kingdom. Why would a man working for the nobility need him? Meanwhile, the man got up from the table and walked over to the boy and began to examine him. The man explained that the boy had a good reputation. He was the son of a woodcutter and respected his father, and that was why he was offering him a job at the Ogent estate. They were going to be moving books from a large home library, a total of nearly 100,000 books, among them important works that cannot be lost. Other people will do the transportation, and only he and Chiron will sort them. When the boy heard about the library, he realized that he could find important information for mages in it. The only people who needed to know about his work were his family. If even one book went missing, or even the information about the library's contents got out, then Chiron and his family would be dead. Chiron looked at his parents, who looked concerned. Since it was a risk for him, the butler offered enough money. They would never earn that much money hunting, so obviously raising their son well was worth it. Vincent shouted that he had not approached him for money. He just wanted Chiron to fulfill his dream. The butler started laughing and asked why the father asked him to take his son, if not for money. The father only wanted Chiron to be able to read books. If he accepted the job, he would certainly be able to read books, but his main task would be to control the process, not to read them. Vincent remembered when Chiron was a child. Once Alina taught the boy a few words for fun, but when he turned 6 and started reading on his own. Chiron has expressive features, thick hair, but more importantly, his mind. Perhaps he has aristocratic blood in him. If he had been raised by aristocrats and not them, he could have gone to school. But he is his son. It is only right that the son of a woodcutter learns to work in the mountain. But when he started to do so, he was scared. But in the end, this boy was brought up by a woodcutter. Vincent told the butler that he didn't need the money. If he had known it would work out that way, he wouldn't have persuaded him like that, and asked the butler to leave their house. As he was heading for the door, Chiron suddenly said that he would accept the job. The butler once again emphasized that the slightest rumor would cause his head to fall off his shoulders, but Chiron understood all the risks. He would never disclose, and even if things went wrong, he would not be offended. The butler said he would take the boy to the mansion in a week. Before he entered the mansion, there was still a chance to refuse, but once he did, there would be no turning back, and he would not be able to leave the mansion until the work was done. When the butler left the house, the father asked why his son had agreed to such conditions. These bastards just need someone who will die for them, and began to blame himself and asked him to refuse. But Chiron hugged his father and thanked him, saying that this job was a valuable gift. Vincent began to cry and asked his son to come back safe and sound, and he would make sure that their family was not offended. A week passed, a carriage was sent for Chiron, and after packing up their luggage, they quickly set off for the estate. Thanks to his state of mind, the boy felt his parents grieving for him, but he needs to stop doubting. Even though he has a great chance, it is still a double-edged sword. Among people with great influence, will he be able to live safely for 2 years? The home of the Ogent family is located in the city of Creus. The family of warriors has been raising professional fencers since ancient times. The previous head was a third-class state fencer, and the current one, Bishop Ogent, is an honorary knight of the 4th class. In short, they run the military forces of the city. One of the men said that the manor was haunted, and when Chiron was almost ready to run away, the other denied it. They got out of the carriage and walked down the path. Chiron began to realize that this was not all real. They came to the building where the office was located, as well as the butler's quarters and the place where Chiron would live. Timurin was already waiting for the boy. He asked him to follow him. He would explain the tasks. They entered a huge library that fascinated the boy. The butler told him that the books from here would be moved to a new library, and he had to sort them. Every week, he will be given a list according to which he will search for and collect books. He has to work from 9 in the morning to 6 in the evening. After that, he has free time, but he is not allowed to go outside and is not allowed to enter the estate without special permission. He has to start work tomorrow. Chiron realized that it was worth risking his life for this. The next day, he put on special clothes and started working. He realized why one person should be in charge of sorting books. The structure should be consistent. For example, if he needs to categorize the book's history of fencing, each person will have their own opinion to send it to the category of professional fencing or comprehensive history. And one more fact that he discovered while working with the structuring system: all knowledge is interconnected. The basis of their unification is history. Knowledge is accumulated on a line called history. History is the backbone of knowledge. Thorough study and its use to reinforce other areas will accelerate learning. Among 10,000 books, about 850 are historical. He will read them in the 2 years he is here. To achieve his dream of becoming a magician, the deputy manager came into the room and could not be allowed to see what Chiron was reading because he had not received official permission. The deputy head praised the boy for erasing the books. He asked not to overwork the boy because there is still a lot to do, so the main thing is not to kill yourself before time. All the responsibility for this is on him. The man returned to the boy and cleaned the dirt from his clothes. This library is visited not only by butlers, but also by the head of the family, as well as by young masters. You need to carefully monitor the form and be sure that nothing in it degrades the dignity of the Ogent family. The man also asked Sharon to do something with all the long hair. The boy took all the comments into account and the man left. He was glad that the man did not notice that he was reading. He needs to be careful these 2 years. He needs to concentrate to stay out of trouble. But the more serious problem is that it's hard. 3 emperors, 7 kingdoms, 1 kingdom of Tormia are difficult to study, and it is difficult to understand the others. The guy realized that if he wanted to use the information at any time, he had to understand every event perfectly. Reading a book late at night, the guy just fell asleep on the table from exhaustion. Timurin walked over to the sleeping Chiron and picked up the book he was sleeping on. If the guy hadn't been digging through practical books, he wouldn't have banned him from coming in here after hours. It had been 3 months since Chiron started working in the large library of the Argent estate. He had gotten used to his job as a sorter and had also learned some information from the servants. They were constantly taking books, but not returning them. Chiron warned them if it would be embarrassing to lose a book, but they kept saying they would return it. The most shocking fact was that the nobles did not care if the books disappeared. But to be fair, and this library is hardly important, but no one should have known that it allowed books to be taken. Still, that doesn't mean that Chiron is safe. Aristocrats can live in peace only if the commoners are loyal to him. The peasants risk their lives for something that the nobles won't even mention to prevent the slightest mistake. The servants become cold and heartless. After the servants left, Chiron continued to work quietly. At one point, a boy burst into the library and shouted something about an old man. He had blue hair, and Chiron realized that it was the Lord's son, Ryan Ogent. As the man's voice approached, Ryan asked Sharon not to say that he was here and hid under the table. In less than a minute, a burly man came in and asked Sharon where the boy with blue hair was who had just come in. This man is his fencing teacher, who has the right to hit him, and Chiron had better tell him where he is if he doesn't want to get a beating. Hearing the threat, Chiron said where Ryan was hiding. The man pulled the boy out from under the table with one hand. The boy started shouting that it was not an understanding, but the teacher did not care. The teacher took the boy's leg and started to drag him to the door. Ryan looked at Chiron and said that he would pay for turning him in. But the boy didn't see a problem with that. because teachers have a lot of authority and he had no choice. According to rumors, the teacher sent the young master to the mountains for a month. Sharon read one book in 12 days, and after fully realizing it, he managed to read 82 more in 4 months. As expected, it was difficult only at the beginning. The following books no longer contain radically new information. If you lay the foundation by reading about 200 books, the remaining 650 will be much easier to digest. While he was reading historical books, he had doubts about whether it was the right decision to study history now. But the further he got acquainted with the activities of the magicians of the past, the more convinced he became that this was the right path. While a scientist researches a theory, a sorcerer implements it in real life. So, a sorcerer and a scientist are the same thing, but not all scientists are sorcerers because they can't enter the state of the spirit, the state of heightened sensitivity of the mind. That is, if Chiron adds a huge amount of information to the state of the spirit, which will become the basis of knowledge, maybe he can become a real sorcerer. Ryan's thoughts were interrupted by Ryan, who burst into the library and shouted that he had been through hell while waiting for this day. The boy climbed the rock again and again, and every time he felt his arms weakening, he thought he would die, but he kept on dreaming of revenge. Sharon realized that he had underestimated Ryan and his anger. He asked him for help, and Sharon snitched on him. But Sharon didn't understand why he had offended the boy so much because he had told the truth. He thought that people in power prefer to use logic that is convenient for them, and he asked Ryan what he should do. Ryan could not understand why the boy was so calm because at first glance, he seemed to be just another butler who had recently arrived. He asked the boy to follow him. They came to the training ground. Chiron thought that Ryan would start beating him until his anger was gone. He was better off dying this way. He couldn't waste the chance his parents had given him by risking their lives. Rihanna threw a wooden sword at Chiron and said it was a duel. As a punishment for being disrespectful to the man who was destined to become the greatest swordsman, he would have to take the blows of his sword. Chiron could not understand what he had done that was so cowardly. As a servant of House Ogent, it was his duty to protect them, but he had betrayed Ryan to the master because he was afraid of punishment. He gave him away, ignoring the fact that Ryan was in trouble. Even though his family disrespected him, he could not take that kind of treatment from the servant. Rihanna pointed his sword in the boy's direction and said that he would only allow him to attack 3 times before he launched his attack. Chiron realized that if he broke even one bone, he would have to go home. He did not understand what he had to do, and decided that he had to attack because he had 3 attempts. But in the first 2 attempts, he failed to strike. Ryan turned out to be very strong. Despite the fact that Ryan was mocking Sharon, he realized that he had one last attempt and had to go all the way. He entered a state of mind and smashed the boy's sword, even though he was holding it in his hand. Chiron's risk paid off. With the first blow, he felt the essence of things. With the second, he calculated the speed of his opponent, and with the third blow, he finally struck him. A thunderous blow that he had been practicing for over 3 years. Ryan looked at the hilt of his sword and asked Sharon where he had learned to fence. But it was not fencing. It was a thunderbolt. Sharon explained that his father worked in the mountains and he used to go with him to cut wood, but he was not strong enough to cut down a tree, and he learned this technique to compensate for his lack of physical ability. Loggers call it a thunderbolt. Ryan took the guy's words as nonsense because he had been training with a sword for 15 years. He didn't understand how you could learn such a technique by chopping wood in the yard. He remembered his childhood, when his sister had smashed a yogi's sword. They were 12 at the time, but his sister had already mastered the secret technique of Ogent. Her teacher no longer had anything to teach her because she had surpassed her peers. She had inherited her father's genius, and a grand banquet was held in honor of it, while Ryan lay on the floor with his sword shattered and couldn't accept what had happened. Because their weapons were destroyed, Ryan said that victory was not awarded to anyone. If Chiron could master the sword, he needed to learn how to handle it properly, and gave him 1 month to do so. Right here, they would duel again, but with real sword. Sharon realized that the risk of death had increased dramatically and asked Ryan to think again, because he had never learned to sword fight. That's when he gave him a month to learn. If a guy is so talented that he has learned to chop down trees, he will somehow figure it out. Sharon decided to fight to the last. Later, sitting at a table in the library, he tried to understand what had happened. The peculiarity of the Ogden house is the inheritance of black and blue hair. The head of the family, Bishop Ogent, has 3 sons and a daughter. The eldest is a 6th grade professional swordsman. The eldest daughter also has incredible talent, but she chose music over fencing and became a pianist at court. The second son, Ray Odent, is called a genius. Unlike his talented dark-haired brothers, Ryan had no abilities. Even the best teacher said so. Everyone who worked at the estate knows this story. Sharon began to reproach himself for making a thunderous blow. He had hurt the pride of a man who had been compared to his relatives all his life. He thought that he would stay alive doing a simple job. Still, he was hardy. Because he lived in the mountains, he could survive if he learned to defend himself. Moreover, the library had a lot of books about fencing. Meanwhile, Ryan was training harder than ever, even breaking his own record by running in circles. The teacher was surprised that the boy was training dutifully. But Ryan himself was not happy with the training because he was standing on his feet. He wanted something harder. The trainer could not understand what was happening. Perhaps the boy had learned something new again, but he had already awakened his scheme. A scheme is both an imaginary body and its schematic representation. If a sorcerer has a state of mind, a fencer has a scheme. All people have an idea of their body, but the scheme is an extremely accurate embodiment. Thus, the masters of the scheme fully understand their body and can even participate in the movement of its cells. Sharon closed the book and realized that this was a complete opposite of the state of mind, but he decided to try. First of all, he began to wean himself off of it, which is simple because it is the same for the state of mind. For the state of mind, he has to erase himself, and for the scheme, he needs to dig deeper into the essence of his existence. If he can pull back the veil at this point, he will complete the first stage of the scheme. But it is ineffective to invest energy in a process that is completely opposite to the state of mind. He preferred to use his state of mind to learn the basics of fencing, and he started with slashing strokes from 8 directions. Let's go back to Ryan. He was hitting a block of wood with a stick with all the strength he had, but he couldn't break it. The teacher asked him to stop because he might tear his ligaments. The teacher told him to stop training for the day. They sat down to rest, and the teacher said that he had never written that in his reports that Ryan had talent, but he still thought the boy was good at something and asked if he had ever thought about what he was good at. But the guy knew exactly what he was bad at. Geniuses know what they are good at and what they are good at. So by working hard, they are guaranteed to achieve what they want. But what they are really afraid of is trying for something that is impossible to achieve. A burning will to achieve results in something they are not good at. This is called the mortal enemy of genius. This was the best consolation he had received recently. He decided that since he didn't have talent to begin with, he had to work hard until he did, and then he would win for sure. In the evening, after finishing work, Chiron went to the training ground. He reasoned that fencing is a set of dynamic strokes aimed at eliminating an opponent. On the other hand, it is also a set of psychological combat technique. For example, an imaginary enemy. It may seem that he has the ability to attack him in an infinite number of directions, but in reality, there are only 8. He spent a month practicing slashing attacks in 8 directions and block his opponent's movements in the same way. The world of fencing is truly endless, just like the world of magic. He admitted that he might not be able to return to his parents, but he had no regrets. Although he stood at the crossroads of life and death, he was lucky to see this amazing world. The day of the fight came. The boys stood opposite each other and pointed their swords. It seemed to Ryan that Chiron was radiating confidence. At first, he might not have been able to learn fencing, but now he was so calm, even though it was his first time holding a real sword. If this guy was as talented as Ray, Chiron could not resist the fear. Death, the source of this fear, is in the future, and the future is an illusion that doesn't exist yet. If you don't imagine what's next, anyone can jump off a cliff. Ryan saw that Sharon was not blindly ready to die, but seemed to have absorbed all his emotion. But he himself is not afraid of dying either. Ryan's first attack, the boy was able to repel. Even if Ryan does this, there is a wall that cannot be overcome using only cheap tricks. The guy's sword attacks are quite heavy and fast. Their speed is starting to exceed the frequency at which he could feel the direction of the sword with synesthesia. Ryan swung his sword at Sharon and made a huge scratch across his sternum. He was already excited because he thought he had won, because he puts his whole skeleton into each stroke. This is the art of fencing, the augmented sword, created for training with two-handed sword. He would not be able to withstand any more of his heavy blows. Sharon thought that if Ryan had brought his sword up after cutting his chest, he would have just stabbed him and ended it all. He didn't understand why the guy was using only big swing attacks, but after a minute, he realized that his understanding of fencing was worse than he thought. Although he could use certain techniques, he lacked insight. In this case, Sharon decided to reduce Ryan's combat capabilities to what he could count on. But when their swords touched, the plan changed dramatically and he decided to attack. Ryan was surprised because he thought that the guy was already tired in order to attack. It was difficult for him to block basic attacks. Sharon has achieved his goal. His opponent's endurance has significantly decreased. Now, he needed to keep the rhythm to maintain his own. Suddenly, Ryan remembered how as a child he fought with his sister Ray. She broke his sword, and how humiliating it was for him. He screamed at Shironu not to mock him. He was going to be the best swordsman in the world. He rushed to attack the boy. Sharon, meanwhile, in his state of mind, could not see the path of his opponent's sword. There were too many random probabilities, and he couldn't take any chances. At the last moment, Sharon managed to deflect Ryan's attack and knocked the sword out of his hands. Ryan was shocked by this. He did not understand how a guy with worse swordsmanship than him could defeat him. It seemed to him that he did not know everything about who this guy was. He was equally surprised because he won the duel, but it was unclear what would happen next. Even though it was a duel, Ryan was an aristocrat. Since he had hurt his pride again, he did not understand what would happen next. Ryan was naturally disappointed in himself for losing again. He told Chiron that since he had won and he had lost, even if he decided to kill him, he would dare to say something against him. But the guy understood perfectly well that if he killed him, then he would not be left alive either. He was not going to risk his life, he just wanted to survive. This fight was absurd from the very beginning. It was not Chiron's fault that Ryan did not want to train and was hiding from his teacher. And in general, Ryan did not understand what a terrible situation Chiron was in because he was stuck between the son of the chairman and his fencing teacher. If he were a man worthy of respect, he would never have put his butler in such a position. A man worthy of recognition would have met his teacher with pride. Chiron thought he was going to die. Ryan thought that after a duel, shouldn't people compliment each other, and wondered where the cold-blooded warrior he had just fought had gone. He is sure that he is facing a genius, but he does not laugh at him like his sister Rai. On the contrary, he faced him face to face, gathering all his strength. Chiron fell to the ground and sat on the floor. Ryan asked him what his name was and told him his full name as well, walked over to him, extended his hand and offered to be friends. It was autumn. The servants came to the library to pick up the books, and Tamaran came with them to check how many books Chiron had already sorted. The boy had done even faster than they expected. Out of almost 10,500 books, he had already sorted 7,000. It's been a year since Chiron started working at the large library in Ogent. As the number of books he has to sort has decreased, his productivity has increased. What's more, he has only 200 books left to read out of the 850 he had set out to read. He read about 3 books a day and was soon able to completely fill the knowledge base he dreamed of. He also tried fencing and learned the essence behind fear. Thanks to this, he feels that the duration of his state of mind has increased. At first it was hard for him, but if you don't give up, you can gradually achieve your goal. And another important point is that nothing compares to making a good friend. After he got closer to Ryan, he realized that despite his enormous height, he was sweet and affectionate. Perhaps this was to be expected from the youngest. He really behaved like the youngest. One day, Ryan came to the library to visit Chiron. He didn't even know that his family read all those books. But for him, reading was a boring activity. Chiron was very worried that the boy would damage the books, but he assured him that even if he burned the library down, he would be able to protect it in front of his family. Chiron asked Ryan why he was not at practice. He replied that his teacher allowed him to study in the library, but of course he did nothing to study there. He was bored. Chiron thought Ryan had become lazy. He was like a fire that can't be stopped once it's lit. As long as there is an opportunity, it will catch fire again and again. Ryan took one of the books from Chiron's desk and after reading its title, asked if he wanted to become a magician and if he really needed books for that. But the books were mandatory. Chiron hadn't had the opportunity to study before he came here, but now that he's read 600 books on history, he knows almost everything. Ryan found the book Chiron was reading very interesting. He read out a quote from the book that went like this: "I am sure you have asked yourself this question at least once in your life. If a swordsman and a sorcerer fight, who will win?" Chiron has searched the whole world for an answer to this question. Even now, when he closes his eyes, he sees the shimmer of the Artuzna Mountains, 6,000 meters above sea level, and there is a fruiting tree in those mountains that eats bird. But Ryan was not interested. He kept flipping through the book and didn't understand why there were no pictures of fencing and no information about it. Suddenly, a man came into the library and said that the swordsman would definitely win. This man was Ryan's older brother. Chiron was excited because this young man had heard their conversation. Ryan asked his brother why he was so sure that the swordsman would win, and he suggested that it was because he was a swordsman himself. This was understandable if you analyze the position of swordsmen and mages on the continent, but Ryan did not understand what their position had to do with the battle. Then he asked Chiron his opinion about who would win. The boy became very excited because he did not understand what this man really wanted. It is probably hard to understand him in normal times, but because of the thoughts that were swarming in his head, it is even harder to understand. He just needed to give a suitable answer. Chiron replied that if a swordsman and a sorcerer are on the same level, it will be difficult for the swordsman to defeat the sorcerer when he enters the state of mind. But if the swordsman uses all his strength in the battle before the sorcerer casts the spell, and Ryan's older brother interrupted him, saying that he was wrong. In his opinion, the wizard will win. Ryan thought about how it had always been like that with Ray Ogden. Ever since they were children, whenever he met someone unpleasant, he liked to ask them about something that was important to them. The man told him that there was an artifact that destroyed the state of mind, called anti-magic. The ability of sorcerers is a state of mind. Fighting a sorcerer in this state is like fighting sharks in the depths of the sea. However, something can evaporate the water and leave the sharks insensitive. It is anti-magic. If the state of mind cannot reach these armors, then neither can magic. No sorcerer can fight someone who uses a really powerful artifact, but this is just a theory. From the very beginning, anti-magic is a costly technique created from the mana that flows in the heart of the dragon. Also, because it has fluctuating qualities, its effectiveness rarely increases, no matter how much money is invested in it. Even Yakra, a master of the wobble equation, was only able to unleash 65% of his potential on the armor of the 5 gods. And because of this, the price is cosmic. The cost of each element is equal to the annual budget of an entire kingdom. The problem is that those who created the anti-magic are sorcerers. Since there is a huge demand for it, it's a perfect way to make money. Wizards literally lined up to use it, so there is absolutely no need to buy such a priceless artifact. Sorcerers are a pathetic class of people who have sold the weakness of their people for profit. Chiron said that this was the essence of wizards. As the man had already said, anti-magic was indeed created by wizards and used to limit magical activity in cities where it was banned. It was also successfully used as protective equipment in magical schools. Although it could be used against sorcerers, this does not diminish its value as a product of intelligence voluntarily given for the benefit of the world. Therefore, in his opinion, based on this fact, it is difficult to prove that a swordsman is more powerful than a sorcerer. But Brother Ryan disagreed with him because reality and ideas are very different. Anyway, the fact remains that a sorcerer cannot win a battle with a swordsman. Having said that, the man left. Chiron was afraid that he would beat him, and when he left, he was relieved. Ryan hugged the boy and said that he was incomparable because it was the first time he saw his brother with such a look on his face. If Chiron's tongue was a blade, he could become the best swordsman in the world. As Ray said, ideas and reality may differ, but the exploratory mind ruthlessly experiments even on its weaknesses. How can you say that this intelligence exists for the sake of world peace? 6 months had passed. Tamaran was drinking tea in his study when the butler came to tell him that they had finished earlier than expected, and the move was completed 6 months early. But he was even more pleased to see that the books, which had been neglected for 20 years, were perfectly sorted. It was a shame to let go of such a useful employee as Chiron, if they could use some excuse to extend his contract. But Tamaran asked the butler to watch his work better and not to talk nonsense anymore. But still, these words made him seriously think about leaving the guy in the estate. Meanwhile, Chiron sat in the empty library and thought that closing a book is easy, but closing a book after reading hundreds of its pages is quite different. It's just a dream, finally. Ryan interrupted the boy's thoughts by bursting into the library screaming because he had just learned that the boy had finished his work and was on his way home. At the same time, Ryan admired the boy for how many books he had read. Chiron asked him to come over and play with him before he left. Ryan was surprised because before that, the boy had been hiding their friendship for a long time. Most of the time, they met in the library and hardly spent any time together. All year, he was very curious about his friend's life, and today his whole family had left the estate. They went to Ryan's room. Chiron was surprised by the grandeur of the room, because one room here is like his whole house, but Ryan's room was the smallest room at the end of the hallway. It looked like a small room that you go to after training, and Ryan lives here. They sat down to play cards, and Ryan lost to Chiron every time. After another defeat, he accused the boy of not playing fair and using his state of mind. Chiron admitted that he has a habit of pushing a card forward when he takes an ace, and it's obvious how long it takes him to decide whether it's a pair or not. Sometimes observation gives better results when you don't focus on something specific, when you follow the opponent's individual actions, but the whole, you can predict his plan. Ryan pondered what he had heard and wondered if it would help him to awaken his scheme. He had a feeling that he understood, but at the same time, he didn't. While the boy was introspecting, Chiron stood up from the table and picked up a book from the cabinet by the window. He asked the boy if he could borrow it because he was tired of reading historical books, so for the first time in a long time, he saw a novel. Suddenly, Chiron heard the sound of a piano. He thought it was strange because there was only one person in the estate who could play the piano. He left Ryan's room and followed the sound, and in one of the rooms, he saw a girl with blue hair playing the piano. This girl was the court pianist and Ryan's older sister. Her name was Raina Ogant. She noticed that the boy was watching her from behind the door. She hadn't seen him here before and thought he was new, but he had been sorting the library for a year, so she hadn't seen him. But when she heard about the library, she immediately realized that this was the guy she had heard about. Not everyone can handle this job, so he must be smart. She asked him if he had ever played the piano. Chiron thought she was a professional, using a scheme when she performed. Besides, Ryan told him that she was the worst person in the estate. Raina invited the boy to sit on a chair next to her so that she could teach him how to play the piano. She saw that the boy was hesitant to sit next to her, so she promised him that no one would scold him because she let him. She was very persistent, and Chiron was not in a position to refuse her, except when he had another chance to sit at the piano. When he sat down next to the girl, she began to explain and show him some of the keys and what the symbols on the music sheet meant. She showed him a simple melody and asked him to play along. When the boy started playing, he did everything wrong, especially since he was very confident in pressing the keys, and Raina was unsure whether to stop him or let him continue. The longer he played, the stranger it was, because he was making mistakes in everything. But at the same time, the melody sounded very similar to something, as if he was completely imitating her performance. And gradually, he started playing correctly. The girl was very surprised. She couldn't call it a game, but Chiron has a strange insight with which he understands the essence. At that time, Ryan burst into the room, yelling at his sister and asking her to stop playing. If she came home, why didn't she go to bed? But when he saw Chiron next to his sister, he was very surprised, and Reina didn't even think they knew each other. Chiron was nervous because he had been hiding his friendship with the boy for so long, and now he might be exposed. It was as if he had committed a crime, but Ryan said that they were friends and asked him not to worry, because this evil witch, as he called his sister, had a rotten soul. She didn't care about such things. Reina approached Chiron and put her hand on his shoulder. She asked him not to worry, because if her brother said they were friends, everything was fine. Sometimes he can be a little pathetic, but he takes responsibility for his words. Chiron was shocked that the girl did not care that her brother was friends with a peasant. All the beliefs he had built up over the 16 years of his life were shattered. When he came to his senses, he asked Ryan why he lied to him, because his sister is a kind and beautiful lady. But Ryan said that the boy was too naive. She was a witch, and no one knew when this woman would try to swallow him whole. The girl only laughed and whispered in Chiron's ear that her younger brother was a little underdeveloped, but she was glad he had such a friend. Ryan noticed that his sister really liked the boy. He asked her if she wanted to take him in and make him part of their family while he was still here. Reina and her little brother started a little fight. Chiron stood there shocked again, because just when he thought he understood the nobles, they confused him again. But it was still strange why Ryan's sister was home now, because she had recently left. She told him that Ray was going to take a certification test. She had come to pick him up tomorrow and they would be leaving tomorrow, and his grandfather was coming later to see a friend. The certification license is a standard and an order for swordsmen and sorcerers, which is recognized not only in the kingdom, but also on the entire continent. About 1,000 people take it every year, but only about 30 pass. There is also a non-certification license. If you officially graduate from a university approved by the kingdom, for example, from the Alphaus Academy of Magic, you can become a non-certified wizard of the 10th rank. It is also possible to increase your rank by gaining points from associations or guilds, but people obviously gather where the money and fame are. Even though there is a non-certification license, there is still a constant demand for certification tests. It's amazing that Ray will be taking it at such a young age, 18. Reina patted the boy's head and told him that she had to go and get everything ready for dinner. The seafood had come from the royal estate, so she needed to cook it herself. As she was leaving, she said that it was nice to meet Chiron and asked when they would see each other next. Chiron was very surprised because tomorrow he was leaving the estate and there was probably no chance to meet again. Fascinated by Reina's beauty, he asked Ryan if she had a boyfriend, but when he came to his senses, he said that he was just curious and it was better to forget about it. But Ryan was already running to his sister and calling her. He still managed to ask his sister if she had a boyfriend, and then Chiron ran up and covered his mouth with his hand. All the maids walking next to Reina were shocked. She asked them not to pay attention, that it was just children playing, and they continued to go to the kitchen and discuss the dishes. But the head butler overheard this conversation and was confused that the young master had guests today because nothing was planned. He asked the butler named Hannes to tell Timuran to come in immediately. The next day, Ryan was training with his teacher in the middle of the winter forest. While the boy had a break, the teacher thought the boy had picked up his training again. It had been a year, but he was sure that would change once Ray got to the royal estate. Suddenly, a butler came running to them, telling them that Lady Reina had asked him to return to the manor right now. She said that the temporary butler Chiron was in danger and on the verge of death. Head butler Louis sent a report to the head of the family, and Chiron was summoned because of his relationship with Ryan. The boy quickly put on his jacket and told the teacher that he was going to see his father because Chiron was his friend and his father had somehow found out. He was sure that he would forgive him when Ryan put in a good word for the boy and later returned to training. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Sharon knelt before Ryan's father. The man told the boy that he would be executed because the commoner dared. He had to know the line that must not be crossed. In the report that the master received from the head butler, many servants talk about how carefree this child was with Ryan. Since Sharon read the contract, he had no objections, but the master gave him his word. But still, the boy had questions about what would happen to Ryan himself. The servants who were present were shocked that the boy did not ask for mercy for himself. The man was outraged by this question and asked what Chiron thought would happen to a nobleman who had been with a commoner, as if the answer were obvious. Chiron said that Ryan was his friend and would remain so. They were friends for a year. Ryan's father was surprised not to be scared, but he thought the boy was taking the Regent family very lightly. Reina asked her father to listen to her explanation, but he had already made up his mind. He ordered the butlers to take the boy out of the mansion and deal with him without anyone else knowing. The two butlers began to discuss the master's decision. There was no reason for everyone to die because of one person. This is their life's home, and in order to protect it, they need to get rid of the slightest conflict that starts to flare up. Now he may think it's the right thing to do, but later he will be grateful for this choice. Ryan burst into the mansion and shouted that Sharon had not committed a mortal sin, but had simply become his friend. But his father was not convinced by this argument. He said that one does not need to sin to deserve death. Ryan doesn't even realize how difficult the nobility's circumstances are. As long as their family is coping with this difficult situation, Ryan can enjoy the privileges of being the son of an aristocrat. But for the boy, these privileges did not matter if he had to give up his friends for them. But to his father, everything he said sounded childish. Friendship with a nobleman implies equal relations. He thought it was strange that Ryan really thought the peasant saw him as a friend, because in this world, many people want to get on the aristocrat's good side. And so his father had ordered him to prove that he and Sharon were really friends. Ryan did not understand how he could prove his feelings, but he could not just say something at random. If he were Chiron, he would easily defeat his father. He remembered the words that Chiron had said to him when they were playing cards, that one should not follow the individual actions of the opponent, but the whole person, and then one can understand his true intentions. In general, the person who was in front of Ryan was a father, a second-class noble, the head of the House of Vigilant, a certified 4th rank, a knight. 30 minutes earlier, the teacher didn't want to let Ryan go to practice, but he persuaded the teacher because his friend who works in the library might die. He remembered that the teacher had said that if you can talk to a person with swords crossed, they can be a friend, and now he was contradicting himself. But the teacher stood his ground, and the most important thing for aristocrats is to rid their family of anything that undermines their reputation. The boy probably didn't even think about the pressure his friend was under when he realized that he was no more important than an insect. But convincing each other won't solve the problem, and if they just stand there, nothing will change either. Ryan said that he was the first one to ask him to be his friend, and now he doesn't want to be a coward. The teacher was impressed by the boy's determination. He honestly admitted and told the reasons without lying. The teacher was very hopeful that he would win and decided to support him, so he gave him his sword on the condition that he would let him go if he took it with him. As Ryan was leaving, the teacher told him that leaving his friend was like leaving a part of himself. Back to the manor. Ryan told his father that he believes that they are true friends with Sharon. The fact that he was his friend was proof of that. But his father was not convinced by this argument. He said it wasn't about wealth. Even now, the reputation of many nobles is at rock bottom. He was ready to give up his son altogether to prevent the downfall of the family. If it was necessary to protect his friend, the boy was ready to go. But Ryan drew his sword, which angered his father. He did not dare to raise the sword at his father, although in fact the sword was not pointed at him. The boy just wanted to show his confidence. Now his father keeps someone who is worse around him to assert himself, but he is wrong about that. Chiron is Ryan's best friend, and he wants to help him. The father was sure that it was Chiron who assured his son that a peasant and a nobleman could be friends, but it was not so. Chiron said he would take responsibility. When Ryan wanted to be his friend, he assumed that one day he would have to choose between friendship and life. Even if it means he dies here, he will never regret being his friend. A true friend is someone who will never betray you. Everyone has one, or everyone dreams of having one. Klumpvogent, the previous head of the family, came out on the balcony. He was listening to everything that was happening and was amazed because in his years there was no such passion. No one expected him to return right now, but his friend had run off with a young maid and it was as noisy as ever. Youth is the best defeat. He asked his son not to jump to conclusions because Klumpf had been watching everything and it was obvious that many people had something to say. So he suggested listening to what others had to say about what was happening. Raina said that although she had only met Sharon yesterday, she had noticed that he was a smart and talented guy, and that he had fulfilled all the requirements of the contract and was leaving the estate today. Given these circumstances, it's hard to say that Sharon had any evil intentions toward Ryan. As a result, she does not believe that his actions have tarnished the family's reputation. Ray Ogden said he doesn't like the kid, but he doesn't care who Ryan is friends with. He just wants it to be over and for them to return to the royal estate. Klump suggested listening to the opinion of the one who had known Sharon the longest, the deputy butler. Tamurin said that the guy did the job he was assigned and did it perfectly, and 6 months earlier, he knew that Ryan went to the library, but he did not know that they were friends. However, in his opinion, if Sharon were a simple child, he would not have been able to sort those 10,000 books. Klump realized that he had to end this meeting. If their friendship continued, rumors would start and become a weakness that political opponents could use against their family. Everyone in this family holds a vulnerable position in the kingdom. He thanked Chiron for teaching his grandson about true friendship, but he had to end it now. Chiron replied that he might never see Ryan again, but that would not mean he would not continue to consider him his friend. If they take that into account, he will follow any orders. Ryan reasoned that Chiron wouldn't die, which made him feel better. He thought, deep down, but he knew that abandoning his friend was like abandoning himself. In any case, it was impossible to negotiate. He declared, "I, Ryan Ogden, third son of the Ogden family, from this moment on, become the Sword of Chiron." The history of the Knight's Oath dates back to the formation of the Kingdom of Tormia. During the years of the house, both small and large countries fought for territory. Atholf I, the strongest of them all, was able to unite and create Tormia. However, the new kingdom had to rebel against powerful neighboring countries. Therefore, instead of being expelled by the kings, those who were defeated were allowed to govern their own territories, and in the process, the knightly oath was born. As a reward for the commitment to become a single-edged swordmaster, they received the status of a nobleman. This is how the nobility was born. Therefore, breaking the oath meant becoming worse than a stray dog. The grandfather was surprised by his grandson's decision, but if he really said he would become his sword, it meant that this guy was so competent. In his opinion, Ryan's swordsmanship was so terrible that he even felt sorry that his friend had a sword like him. Clump approached Sheeran, put his hand on his shoulder and told him that it was over, but he would never point his blade at him. He asked him to take care of his grandson. Since they had become sworn friends, he could not let them go just like that. He ordered the head butler to take the carriage that Sheeran was to ride home in and bring his parents here. After that, everyone left, and Sheeran and Ryan went to their room. Sheeran was surprised by the boy's decision to take the oath. He didn't have to do it for him. But for Ryan, it was the right decision. He just decided to bet his life on such a person. Ray came into the room and asked if Ryan had really lost to Sheeran in the sword fight. Since her brother swore a knight's oath, they are thinking of a new plan. But in any case, her father wants to enroll him and Sheeran in the Kaizen Swordsmanship Academy. Sheeran was shocked to hear this, but he became a member of the family, and Ray told him about his talent to see if they would want to give him a chance and invest in him. Apparently, they want to make him successful for Ryan's future. But Ryan was outraged that Sheeran would be sent to school without his consent, at a time when they could finally play whatever they wanted. And in any case, Sheeran will not go to fencing school because he is a future wizard and he has already discovered the state of mind. Reyna was very surprised that her brother had taken a knight's oath to a future sorcerer. After all, she was sure that the swordsman could be stronger than a sorcerer. Sheeran used synesthesia, which is felt due to the state of mind, to predict his opponent's movements and win. Reyna praised him for coming up with this idea. Apparently it was possible because the power of his state of mind is quite strong. She had heard that in school, the higher the level of concentration, the stronger the state of mind, and even more amazingly, when you reach that level of concentration with a sword in your hand. Reyna promised to talk to her grandfather about Sheeran's career path, provided he attends the fencing school. Teacher Kate already knows about this decision, so he decided to end the contract tomorrow. He said he would read a farewell speech in the morning. Ryan was shocked by this decision because he respected his teacher very much. Their conversation was interrupted by the butler, who said that family members were waiting for Sheeran in the reception hall. The head of the family said that if they wanted to, they could meet him first. What a great surprise it was for Sheeran when he saw his parents in the reception hall, not the head of the Ogent family, but his parents. They hugged each other and were very happy to see each other, because it had been a year and a half since they had last seen each other. But they did not know the reason why they were invited here, because it was Sheeran who had written earlier that he had finished his work and had to return home. He told how he had made a friend while working at the library, about his background and how he had taken a knight's oath, and how he had gotten permission to be friends with him. The head of the Bischoff family, Ryan and Reyna, entered the room. They introduced themselves and met Sheeran's parents. At first, the parents were treated to various dishes, and Sheeran's parents were shocked by the amount of food and the number of forks on the table. After lunch, they went to have tea. Vincent didn't know what a knight's oath was, but he thought it was strange that they showed such kindness to the woodcutter's family. He decided to find out what the oath meant. He thanked the head of the family for their good attitude toward his son, but he was still a little worried. Bischoff replied that he could not believe that his son had sworn an oath to Sheeran. It was not pleasant for him. But still, for the Ogents, a family that honors the politics of militarism, the knight's oath is indisputable. If they were treated so disrespectfully just because of the difference in status, the Ryan's honor would be tarnished. Also, from now on, they will use a respectful form of communication. Their family will support them and will not turn away from Sheeran. He added that he was surprised that Sheeran uses a state of mind, because this state cannot be achieved by strange work. It is a talent that was born with. As far as Bischoff knew, Sheeran's goal was to become a wizard. So if he wanted to get an unofficial magic license as soon as possible, the Alphas Academy of Magic, one of the 5 most prestigious schools in the kingdom, should be a good fit. He did not mean that Sheeran should enter the academy to become a wizard, but not doing so, having a number of privileges, is unwise, so he did not advise against it. Besides, he should go to that place to meet the standards of the House of Ogunti. One of the main problems was the boy's background, because magical schools are elite. They do not accept anything but children of aristocrats, so they can offer only one solution. Vincent was shocked that his son wanted to become a wizard. He realized that he knew almost nothing about him. The Clumps said they wanted to adopt Chiron so that he could study at the academy. Bischoff has a young cousin who has no children yet, and if they add Chiron's name to the family registry, the problem will be solved. They had no intention of stealing their child. It will only be on paper. Thus, he would become a nobleman. Vincent reasoned that no one in the world had a chance to change their ancestry, but it was as if they were allowing their child to be stolen. He looked at Chiron and said that he was his father's son and could not become someone else's adopted son. Reina tried to convince him that it would only be in the documents, and they will treat his parents as if they were real. He will be able to fulfill his dream. Nothing will change. And in general, becoming a nobleman is rarely offered to anyone. But Chiron stood his ground. If he had to give up his parents, he didn't need the academy or his dream. Clump stood up from the table and shouted that there are things you have to give up in order to succeed, and if he couldn't do that, then his dream was not insignificant. Chiron agreed with that. It didn't matter to him how beautiful his dream was. It was what he had taken from his parents. If his parents were the roots, then his dream was the fruit that was nourished by them. Telling him to give up his roots is like telling him to die. But suddenly Vincent bowed down and begged to adopt his son because he was not his biological father. The man said that Chiron was a child they got by accident, and he was sure that the boy came from a noble family. In his opinion, he did not deserve such a son. If he became an adopted son of aristocrats, he would be able to go to the right place. Chiron was outraged by his father's actions because he knew that Vincent was not his biological father. The only reason they didn't ask him was because a person can only have two real parents, and he dreamed about it. He asked his father if he had thought about his feeling. Who would want to be abandoned twice by their parents? Vincent hugged his son and apologized. He made a promise that he would never leave him again. Bishop had heard that there were some special conditions at the Alphas Academy of Magic and asked his father if he could arrange them for Chiron, because he knew that the director was in his debt. But Clump knew that although the principal was principled from top to toe, the best course of action was to keep pushing. 3 days later, until Ryan left for fencing school, thanks to the grace of the Ogentas, the Chiron family was able to stay in their home. Vincent was still apologizing to Chiron. He was worried how many years he would be able to hold out this time. The first time he and Ryan had free time was 3 days later. Chiron had to calm Ryan, who was crying because of their separation, because when he got into the carriage, he would be taken to the fencing school. They promised each other to meet during the holidays and write each other letters every day. Ryan put his hand on his shoulder and said with a serious expression that Chiron should become a wizard, and he would become the strongest knight and be the sword that would protect him. Their conversation was interrupted by Reina, who suddenly ran up and slapped Ryan on the neck and asked him to think about his studies. Chiron told him not to worry, because their grandfather would do everything to get him into the academy, and he bowed to Reina and thanked her for her help. At first, the girl thought he was just a nice little brother, but he turned out to be a very sensitive guy. Even in such a terrible situation, he did not give up his beliefs. Reina was sure that they would meet again when Chiron became a wizard. The boy asked the girl to take care of Ryan. After that, the boys got into their carriages and left. The meeting of these two hot-tempered young men will remain in history as the beginning of an adventure that will shake up the structure of this world. Meanwhile, at the Magic Academy, Alphas Clump was talking to the director about Chiron. Although the two men had been friends for nearly 50 years, the headmaster could not grant his request. He needed a good reason to accept the boy. Anyway, personal agreements were not created as a backup plan for nobles. There are many applications every year, but personal agreements also have their own requirements. But Clump stood his ground, saying that he was a special boy, and yet he managed to get the director interested. He added that he did not ask him to accept some stranger, but rather a friend of his youngest grandson, and he is really something. When Clump looked at the boy, he saw the director in his youth. The director of the academy immediately realized that the boy had some problems, because if he was so talented, he could have entered the academy himself. Clump told us that the boy was not a nobleman, and how he refused to become a nobleman. New opportunities can always appear, but when people give up their beliefs, they end up losing everything. The fact that a person does not make concessions means that everyone can accept his opinion as correct or condemn it. According to Clump, the director did what he had to do. He taught a lot of talented people. Isn't it time to let go of the resentment? The reason Mircha taught children was because he did not want someone like him to appear. Clump told him that the boy was like him, so he could not give guarantees that the boy would not go down the same terrible path. Clump said the man was a genius, born once in a century. He was called the light of the Milch family, but once he took a wrong turn and lost almost everything, but eventually came back. Of course, no one expected him to become an old-fashioned director in the middle of nowhere. But there was a time when Clump himself was in a difficult situation, when a talentless fool became an official third-class swordsman and he was worried about the kingdom. Mirhe got up from the table and went to the window. Perhaps it was fate that they knew Chiron. The boy who disappeared 4 years ago had returned. Although he didn't believe in fate, the talent that was hindered by his status had changed its route and 4 years, and now it was standing right in front of him. Is this really fate? And yet he made the decision to accept the boy. 3 months passed and spring came. Shironarian was already 17 years old. He said goodbye to his parents and promised to write often. Vincent kissed the boy's forehead and said he was proud of him. Shiron's entry into the academy could have been a celebration for the whole village, but his father forbade him to tell anyone about it. Apparently, he refused to live in the city when the Ogent family offered, because he did not want to be able to blackmail the boy with his family. Shiron said goodbye to his parents, got into the carriage, and headed to the academy, and just like that, his first day at the Academy of Magic began. When he and the butler arrived at the gates of the school, the man told him that the tuition and materials were on them, and that the main thing for the boy was to study well. Shiron thanked Timuran for his help, but in response he heard that a villager will always be a villager, no matter how talented he is, and he will never become better than a nobleman. But not everyone is given this opportunity. When the boy enters the school, many aristocrats will look at him with distrust, but he must persevere. Then he will be able to stand and go all the way. The butler took the boy's belongings and asked him to follow him because he had to register at the school. When they reached the hall, the man said he had to go, and they said goodbye. Shiron was confused because he did not know who would meet him. While he was waiting, he looked at the various stands in the hall, and on one of them he saw that the Magic Academy used a 9-class system, and that there were 420 students there, 30 of whom were in the graduating class. The principal approached the boy and asked if he remembered him, as they had met before. Of course, the boy remembered him and thanked him for that time. The man took the boy to the hall where he had to take an entrance test. It was necessary to determine the boy's class. Shiron said that he already knew how to enter a state of mind. The principal was delighted that he had discovered it on his own, and it would be great to teach him from childhood. Despite the fact that it was already late, he had to teach the boy the basics. Only children would be entering for the entrance test, so if they came early, it would ruin his reputation. On the way to the entrance hall, they looked around the school. In one of the classrooms, they saw students flying. It was a class for beginners from 10th to 8th grade. Then they went to a higher-ranked class from 7th to 4th. There was a different atmosphere there because everyone was their peers. They were discussing their studies very lively. Shiron heard what 2 boys were talking about. One of them was asking if more energy was used to bring the atmosphere below freezing. Wouldn't the condensation of the refrigerant be more efficient? And he told the guy that there was a disadvantage in that the reverse reaction would be accelerated and it would be better to redirect the timescale instead of the energy. But the guys didn't even understand what he was talking about. As he walked past the bulletin boards, he noticed that all the people listed here had the same abilities as him, but if you think about it, they were better than him. Shiron also wanted to improve. In this place, he would learn everything from the very beginning and take the first place in the ranking. His thoughts were interrupted by a girl calling out to her friend named Emma. When the guy turned around, he saw a girl with red hair and he remembered how she was with those bandits. He hoped she hadn't noticed him and turned his head away. The girl caught up with Emma and told her that their new student, Shiron, was very handsome and probably transferred to them from somewhere. But Emma also had time to look at his face, and it seemed very familiar to her. Her friend thought she liked him too, and started to fight with her about it because she saw him first. At this time, Emma could not remember where she had seen him. As the most popular girl in the middle class, Emma Karmas was constantly rejected by her older and younger students, by her classmates. She was a model among model students, and the only person who knew about Sharon's past when he entered the academy. Meanwhile, the principal and the boyfriend reached the exam area. When they entered the hall, they saw the boy standing in the center of the room in front of a long table where the teachers were sitting to make the assessment. The boy had to enter a state of mind and feel the letters on the floor change. So ain't Cheowan he had to say when he felt it, and they would determine the size of the strength, mobility, and position of his state of mind. When the boy's evaluation was over, one of the teachers said that the students this year were great. Their students were getting better and better every year. Next, Shiron was called for evaluation. The teachers knew that the boy had passed a special selection because the principal had told them about it. They were also surprised that the boy was already an adult, and when they saw that he had borrowed the name of the Ogent house, they immediately realized that his family was not famous. The teacher asked if Shiron could do magic, but the boy hadn't learned anything yet. But even if he hadn't studied anything yet, he might be able to do some things, because magic is the process of releasing knowledge from the mind. Shiron went to the center of the room and began to enter the state of mind. It was not easy for him to do, but he managed. The teacher asked him what the most distant number was, but he did not answer. The principal tried to encourage the boy and told him that they were not comparing him to others, but were just looking for a better way to teach him. The boy said he could see the number, but it was so far away that he couldn't see it. But he didn't need to see it. He needed to feel it. But Shiron added that it was a very long number. He started naming it from the first digits. It was 3.14. One of the teachers said that there was no such number among the set numbers, but he was sure that he felt it. The teacher mentioned that there were several cases when the number pi was shown. This means that the size of the state exceeds the limits they set. Did the boy's state exceed 30 meters? Next, they asked what color the guy was experiencing. In his state, everything was colored blue. The testing was over, and now the teachers needed to consult which class the boy would be placed in, so she asked him to wait in the hallway. When the boy came out, all the teachers were enthusiastically discussing Chiron's capabilities. His performance surprised them. They even thought that he might have lied to them. After all, a state of mind with a concentration of 90% and a diameter of 30 meters in a 17-year-old boy who has never studied magic looks like nonsense. But there was no point in lying to the students, because when they got to a higher level class, they would not understand the curriculum, let alone be able to pass the tests, so why lie? Moreover, it seems that even the teachers forgot that the number pi is displayed as a false code, and this is not something a student can say to attract attention. The principal asked the teachers where to send Chiron. Sina Oliver, who is a 6th-ranked certified sorcerer, said that in the 6th grade, they study the development of the state of mind and its theory, and in the 5th grade, they begin to teach real magic. So since this student's state of mind is fully developed, she suggested the 5th grade. Ted, who is a certified 6th-rank magician, said that a 17-year-old boy knows nothing about magic. If you send him to a high-level class, he will only get confused and cause them problems, so he thought they should teach him the basics. The teachers began to quarrel, accusing each other of wanting to take the talented student for themselves. While Ted and Sina were arguing, the other teachers were discussing that although he was talented, he was still a very young student. One teacher suggested that he should be taught step by step starting in 9th grade. If we send him to a basic class with children, he might lose motivation to learn, or even postpone the assignment and just watch him. Another teacher suggested the 7th grade, a high-level class that teaches the basics of the state of mind. If this boy is really talented, he can easily transfer to an older class. The principal agreed with this idea, and thus Shiru was placed in the 7th grade. The Magic Academy has a 9-grade system. Depending on their grades, students are assigned to 9 classes of varying degrees of difficulty, where they are divided into 3 groups. Elementary classes from 9th to 8th, where students focus on developing their state of mind. In high-level classes 7 through 4, students gain the knowledge to use magic and state of mind. And finally, graduation classes 3 through 1, where students undergo rigorous training to become professional sorcerers. The next day, Chiron went to his first class. When he entered the classroom, the children whispered to each other because he looked older than they did, but he was friendly and hoped they would get along. The Academy of Magic occupied 75.425 kilometers of mountainous territory, including the dormitories. It had more than 33 buildings and 40 training centers. Although it was only allowed to leave the territory during vacations, it did not cause inconvenience as everything you needed was in the school. Classes ended at 5, and after that, students had free time. They would go to the open round-the-clock library or form research groups with other students with similar interests, which fueled their desire to learn. As expected, the classes were difficult. There are many subjects that require a lot of knowledge. Even for nobles who had studied since childhood, it was not easy. However, Chiron was going to do his best to catch up. According to the chronological order of history, which he had memorized, all the knowledge of the world was accumulated gradually. Suddenly and quickly, the boy's first lesson was over. In the afternoon, practical classes on the state of mind would begin, but the schedule did not say where they would be held. Among the students, he saw a girl with pink hair, and it seemed to him that she was his age, so he decided to ask her where the training camp would be held today. The girl replied that the practice was on the 2nd common training area, but Chiron did not understand what it meant and asked her about it. Twice a week, all the middle school classes trained together. Today, there will be a briefing. The boy went to the training room, and of course, he was out of luck because the classes were held together with the class in which Emma was studying. He did not want to run into her, but now twice a week they had joint classes. The high school and junior high classes had active discussions and had strict routine. Atella Romi, a teacher who specialized in the use of the state of mind and was a certified 6th-ranked sorcerer, entered the classroom. She said that she saw many familiar faces in the audience, both students and new ones. The woman knew that there was a student who had just joined them today, so she asked him to stand up and introduce himself, and he did. Emma, seeing him again, was still trying to remember where she had seen him. Everyone was talking around that Chiron had done very well in the entrance exam, but she hadn't heard his name before. She was sure she had saved many faces with her red eye. The Karmas family was considered a generation of geniuses. It is said that their unique abilities and eyes are passed on only to Karmas heirs. It makes it possible to remember specific events with precision, and therefore the concept of learning is meaningless for them. Karmas's youngest daughter Emma was recognized as the most talented of the whole family. But one day, Emma's life was turned upside down when she accidentally met a peasant boy in an alley. And then Emma remembered where she had seen Chiron. She couldn't believe that the Red Eye's memories could be wrong. She thought he was a nobleman, but he had been just a man all along. She couldn't understand how he had gotten into the Magic Academy at all. For Emma, her past is a dark and disgusting secret. She's made sure that nothing reminds her of it. But what if a guy remembers her and what happened 5 years ago and tells everyone that she was hanging out with street thugs, that Karmas was actually very interested in boys, and that she even wanted to undress him? Emma realized that she could not let this happen and decided that she had to prevent it. The lecture began. The teacher began to talk about the conscious mental state of a sorcerer. Its first form is a sphere, as it is the easiest to focus on, but in practice, it can be ineffective. The teacher went to the center of the classroom and began to demonstrate the basic form of the state of mind. As she had said earlier, in practice, it is barely usable. Chiron saw her state of mind with his own eyes. It began to show him how to use magic to hit the target. The diameter of her state is 10 meters, but the target is 12 meters away, so she used a fireball, a fire-type magic. She launched the fireball, but the fire disappeared before reaching the target. Most often, magic is not able to go beyond the zone, so it retains its form only within the state of mind. But it was possible to expand its area. Changing the form of a state requires enormous concentration. In real battles, when every second counts, constantly changing the state of mind is simply ineffective. Therefore, they use it in 4 forms. These 4 ways form the state of mind. She began to show the protective form, which was presented in the form of a cube and prevents the destruction of the state of mind from attack. The more faces, the higher the protective function. Next, the star shape is the attack form. Thanks to it, you can catch the movements of the target. This form is most useful when fighting a large number of enemies. The next is the target shape, designed for long-range battles. However, it does not work well against fast-moving targets. The main thing to worry about when using it is the speed of rotation. And finally, the form of evasion. It's no secret that even 5th grade students find it difficult to use it successfully. That's why the teacher decided to show it by example. She entered a state of mind, but it went beyond her body. Sharon could not understand this because the state of mind is the mental state of a sorcerer. How is it possible to separate thoughts from the body? The form of evasion is definitely difficult to use, the teacher continued, so much so that only specially trained sorcerers can do it. Its advantage is that as long as the sorcerer is not in the center, there are no restrictions on movement in the state of mind. Thus, there is no need for instant use, and the range of action is infinitely large. Athela invited the students to practice and invited the person who had won first place in the speed shooting. It was 4th grade student Emma Carmus, and the teacher asked her to come to the center of the classroom and demonstrate. The girl certainly didn't want to be the center of attention, but she had no other choice. One of the 4 forms of the state of mind is the goal form. Its advantage is efficiency over long distances. However, it is weak against a fast-moving target and a large number of opponents. But if it is supported by someone who can simultaneously rotate the area and control the state of mind at high speed, then the disadvantages disappear. After all, it becomes an irresistible force for the enemy at a long distance. Usually, participants in speed shooting training use all 4 forms. But despite this, the high school student always takes first place using only the target form. Chiron looked at the girl and thought that although he was just starting out, he could tell that her technique was unique. Not only does she rotate the spirit state zone while stationary, but she also sweeps away everything in her path. She defeated the target with 1 blow. Her facial expression says that she does not have complete freedom of action. She is an elemental in her every move. He understood why the guys are crazy about her. Emma is not only a first-class aristocrat, but also does everything perfectly. Emma is an incredible person, but why was she hanging out with those thugs? When they finished, they locked eyes and each realized that the other remembered them. The girl couldn't help but laugh. He was so annoying, but her guesses were confirmed. She reasoned that if he spread rumors about her past, she would get in trouble. Although she was the best student at the academy, even if Sharon told him something, no one would believe him. After the demonstration, the classes split up for practice. The 7th grade students started with the protective uniforms. Because wizards need to stay focused to survive on a disorganized battlefield, the trick is to feel how the consciousness contracts and condenses. Having compacted the state of mind and created a structure, then it will be possible to raise its boundaries to prevent destruction. It seemed to Shironu that it worked, but until he saw it, he could not be sure. It would be easier if he could use the visible zone. The boy went up to the teacher and asked if he could use the visible zone, but first the students had to do it. Since it was not being used right now, he could try. Emma's friend saw that the newcomer was in the visible zone and immediately told Emma about it. She choked on the water she was drinking at the time, so surprised was she by what the 7th grader was doing. But her friend noticed that the girl was acting strangely. Sharon, meanwhile, had entered a state of mind. Now that he started to think back, he realized that he hadn't been told the size of his state of mind on the entrance exam. He wondered how much bigger it could get. All the students were watching Sharon. Now he began to create a protective form, but his boundaries did not rise. On the contrary, they began to collapse, but it was still good when he practiced. He thought he was frightened by what he saw, but his attention would not be swayed by something like that. What is the difference between what happens outside the visible zone and inside? Something must have caused it. Then Chiron finally realized that he had made a mistake, which was why the teacher was showing him everything so calmly. In the state of concentration, when the state of mind changes, which means that when you try to reduce it, it also concentrates. The problem is that he makes his state of mind smaller than it is, but still, he managed to increase his state of mind. The students who watched this were surprised by the size of his state of mind. Now that it was not leaning toward the same size, he was going to squeeze it and create one of the forms. It was as if Chiron was inside a precious stone. The teacher was amazed that he had succeeded on the very first day, although the fact that the convergent type succeeds in defense helped him. Emma observed how well the boy was doing, and she came to the conclusion that someone was definitely helping him. Soon enough, he will be able to close the gap in the classes, and his influence will only grow, so she decided to change her plan and secretly get closer to him. Sharon told the teacher that the size of the zone was increasing again. She replied that as the size decreases, the density increases, and with a density like his state of mind can withstand almost any physical action, so it can withstand magic. She praised the boy and asked him to come out of the state of mind. Atella recognized his insight in creating a protective form, but the guy was clearly helped by the convergent type and the extremely large size of the spirit state. An infinite number of gazes expressing a wide variety of feelings were directed at Chiron. The next day, another look was directed at the boy. The teacher who had scared him the most during the entrance test came to class. Her name was Sina Oliver. Chiron did not know, but she was actually a 5th grade teacher. She deliberately devoted her free time to the 7th grade. She disagreed with Professor Ted because she thought that Sharon should have been sent to the 5th grade. He would have been able to catch up sooner or later, and she would have taught him on her own. Sina immediately cast a single spell. A crystal appeared in her hand, and a frosty wind began to blow in the classroom. There was no combination of the words cold energy in the world, so the temperature can rise infinitely, but it cannot fall infinitely. The state of zero energy is called absolute zero. If you take a bit of energy at room temperature, you can easily create an ice crystal. But if you divide it into small particles and create a convection flow, they will create a temperature so low that it can kill a person. A sorcerer controls the world within his state of mind. On a certain territory, the sorcerer becomes a kind of god, manifesting synthesis, touching light, smelling or smelling a touch. The special senses of sorcerers give them the ability to control reality. To activate a spell, you need to have the ability similar to the gods, namely omniscience and omnipotence. Sorcerers use them to activate magic. It doesn't matter what level of omnipotence you have, it's impossible to cast spells without a knowledge base. Despite the fact that sorcerers are endowed with outstanding abilities, they must understand the structure of the world no worse than scientists. Chiron realized that this was the reason why he could not use magic, because he had no idea about omniscience and developed only omnipotence. Sina continued the lesson and said that in the future, students would study various subjects here. The state of mind is only half of what magic can do. If they don't study hard, they will never become worthy magicians. After class, students usually go to the library or participate in research groups. Sharon spent every day in the library. Even though he was barely catching up with the aristocrats in terms of academic performance and was tired from lack of sleep, he enjoyed studying here because he was striving to fulfill his dream. While he was thinking, walking down the street, he realized that he could not feel the ground. Looking down, the ground was far away, but he didn't realize how he had flown until he turned around and saw a man in black holding a collar behind him. They flew to a deserted place, and the person holding him took off his hood. It turned out to be Emma Carmis. Sharon knew he would run into her one day, but he didn't expect it to happen so soon. Could this really be the girl he met 5 years ago? Emma remembered the first time she saw the boy. At first she was going to just let him go, but when he started to cry, she wanted to see him cry even harder. But this boy is different now. Sharon said he remembers her ordering the bandits to take off his clothes, but the girl interrupted him and said it was a misunderstanding. The bandit and the boy realized that Emma was afraid that he would spread rumors about her, but they were both afraid of that. He asked the girl to apologize to him, and now she is the best student in an advanced class, popular, but the past cannot be changed. The easiest solution would be to apologize instead of making excuses. And she asked what she would gain by apologizing. Can she be sure that after apologizing, he won't betray her and everything will remain between them? If she apologizes, she will admit her guilt and will not be in a favorable position. But it would be a commonplace courtesy, in Sharon's opinion, to the person she hurt, not an act for the sake of gain. Although she pretends to be a perfect student, her nasty nature hasn't gone away. But Emma decides to scare the boy with high school student, because if he does something wrong, not only the advanced classes will become his enemies, but not only his classmates. Everyone will know that he is an ordinary peasant and violates the school charter. But she didn't want him expelled from the academy. They would watch him and decide if he was trustworthy. From now on, Chiron was to bring her coffee every morning. This way, she would see how he would carry out his errands and then decide whether he could be trusted. It must have been hard for a commoner to get into the academy, and it would be sad if he was expelled. When he became his sixth, she would begin to trust him and threatened that if he told the teachers, she would kill him with her own hands. After that, Emma flew away. Chiron thought that it was better than being expelled, but would the girl accept what he asked? The next day, near the first library, Chiron brought coffee to Emma, which attracted the attention of many students. The girl took the coffee and then without saying a word. While drinking her coffee, Emma was satisfied that she had humiliated Chiron in front of everyone. Soon he will turn into an ordinary junior high school student who is undividedly in love with her, and no matter what he says, no one will believe him. All her experiences of 5 years disappeared. Chiron felt humiliated and still caught the eyes of other students, but he knew that if he followed his emotions, he would be the only one left with nothing. He decided that if he was going to gain her trust, he would do it perfectly, and it would all depend on his wits. From that moment on, for 10 days, every morning, Chiron brought coffee to Emma. More and more students were coming each time. Emma reasoned that with so many people coming to watch the show, they probably didn't suspect anything and needed to end it quietly. The girl's friend Serial asked if she was going to reciprocate, because rumors about it had already spread. And besides, Emma had never even looked the guys in the eye, but she takes coffee from Chiron every day. Everyone is waiting for the birth of the legendary couple. Emma was shocked and angry because she did not expect such an outcome. She knocked the coffee out of the guy's hands and asked him to spend more time studying, not following her around and not bringing her coffee. The friend ran after the girl and warned her that unpleasant rumors might start, but Emma didn't care. When she got to the senior year, it would be over. Chiron was overwhelmed by the fact that he didn't have to do anything. In the evening in the first library, Emma sat behind the books. She did it so the new kids would start weird rumors, but she ended up making them herself. It's a good thing she ended it before it got worse, but it didn't matter now. The color of her eyes changed to red. Red eyes are karmas, or self-created memories, in scientific terms. This skill allows you to memorize your states at a particular moment. Over the past 10 days, she had memorized what Chiron looked like when he ran her errands. In recent days, his gaze did not change. Even his pupils did not move. It doesn't matter how much a person wants to hide their feelings, their eyes still give them away. Since it is impossible to control the autonomic nervous system, if Chiron is able to follow his eyes, he is either controlling his emotions like a robot or he is completely sincere. Because everything didn't go according to plan, Emma's head is in chaos, so she went to rest in her room. Jake Ardius was waiting for her at the entrance. He had been waiting for the girl for a long time because of rumors that the snotty little Chiron was hitting on her. The guy handed her a cup and said it was the best coffee with nutmeg. In his opinion, the great Emmy deserves all the goodies in the world. Not unlike that poor guy, Jake Ardius, the future heir to the title of Royal Bailiff, is perfect for Emma. But she didn't think they were in a good enough place to have that conversation, and she knew that Jake's company was trying to humiliate her at every opportunity. But the guy objected to her, saying that the girl's attitude towards him was also an attitude towards the whole family and he could not ask someone to dishonor him. Emma did not believe what the boy said. She believed that he was worthless without the support of his family and that he had created a company that secretly poisoned others. But in Jake's opinion, the Karmas family has no power, even though they are considered prominent. He threatened that with his family's influence, he could bankrupt and destroy Karmas in an instant. Emma looked into the boy's eyes and said that his gaze was evil, unlike Sharon's, like a rotten fish. Jake was outraged by this comparison. It seems that the order of his actions should be reversed. Before he conquered her, he needed to set up an obstacle, so he would make it so that this guy could never use magic again. To silence the boy, Emma knocked the cup out of his hand and entered a state of mind. Using the 4 forms, she confused him and took a risk because she couldn't use magic here. She knew that the boy would not do anything to her, and she added that Chiron doesn't fail by relying on his family. He's the one who takes responsibility for his decisions. She bet that Jake would not reach the same level as Sharon in 6 months. Meanwhile, she filled everything around with oxygen. If he entered the zone, the girl could set it on fire. He would not win the first in the advanced class, and Jake just ran away from Emma. A few days passed. The small commotion that Emma had caused turned into chaos. Serial saw Sharon coming out of the library and showed him the letter that said Sharon had been kidnapped and would be castrated if Emma didn't meet with the kidnappers, and said that half an hour ago she saw Emma talking to a stranger. The guy was holding a letter and said that the boss wanted to see Emma. The girl took the letter, and when she read it, she immediately realized that it was Jake's handiwork. Serial asked the girl to tell the professors, but it was that simple. If the board of professors starts looking into everything, Emma will have to explain her relationship with Chiron and her past will be revealed. And if it comes to that, they will find out that the guy is a peasant. Emma gave the bag to her friend and told her to wait until 7 o'clock. If she didn't return by then, her friend had to go to the teachers. She was sure that even if there were a dozen freaks like Jake there, they would not be able to stand up to her. She also told Serial that she had her own reasons for not being able to ignore it, and that this was the first time she had ever asked for such a favor and asked her to wait until 7 o'clock. Sharon looked at his watch and it was only 6 o'clock. The reason Emma didn't want to talk to the teachers was to keep their secrets. They were connected, which meant that she did it to keep Chiron's secret too, so he decided to find her. After saying goodbye to Serial, he ran to the 14th training area towards the mountain, but the girl caught up with him and lifted him into the air, because if he ran, he might not make it to the 7th. When they reached the training area, they saw no one there. Chiron realized that they were in a different place, because Emma's friend could have told the teachers everything. Chiron asked Serial to go back and tell the teachers, because she would get there faster without him. The girl started asking about their relationship, which angered the boy, because now was not the time for discussions. The longer they waited, the more risky the situation became. When the girl flew away, Sharon began to look for any clues to find Emma. He entered a state of mind and noticed fresh shoe marks left by 2 people. They broke off halfway, so they had flown away. He could see smoke in the distance and realized that he was heading in that direction. Meanwhile, Emma met the guys who had called her. The guys did not expect the girl to come. As expected, the boss outsmarted her. Then Jake came out and was very surprised that the girl came alone. How much he appreciated Sharon's obedience. Emma asked where Sharon was. Jake laughed and replied that he was probably in the library, borrowing books, and didn't realize that his girlfriend was about to leave because of him. And they didn't even care about the guy. They were all there for the girl. All the guys are going crazy with the desire to take revenge on her for what she did to them, and especially for the way she insulted Jake yesterday, and he was going to pay her back in full. But all the threats did not scare the girl. On the contrary, she entered a state of mind and threatened to get rid of them. She started throwing fire at the boys and they started to run away. Jake knew that the form was weak in a battle with a large number of opponents. They were shocked by the girl's abilities because it was not what they had seen in the training room, but no matter how good the technique is, there will always be a weakness. Jake separated himself from the others, rose high to form a horizontally rotating target to attack the girl, and launched a wind blade. But the girl dodged and laughed at this pathetic attempt. Now she realized why the guy's grades sucked, all because he wasted time on nonsense. Suddenly, Emma began to feel strange. She was going to go crazy if she didn't dispel her state of mind, because she had just been cast in anti-magic, which was forbidden. Jake got down on the ground, took a knife out of his pocket, and approached the girl. He asked if she would accept his offer now, and she had to post in a way he liked, and if not, he would do something to her. But the girl said she would kill him as soon as he touched her. Her hands were locked, she couldn't get away. Emma's scheme was not working because she stopped training her after 12 years. Meanwhile, Jake was getting even closer. He threatened to cut her face so that the boys would stop chasing her. As soon as the knife got close to her face, who yelled "Freeze!" It was Chiron. He was standing with his finger in his hand. At first, Emma was shocked by his appearance, but then she was even angry that he came alone. The boy saw that Emma couldn't move and thought that even if there were more of them, it was impossible to imagine that they could defeat the best middle school student. In any case, Serial should have called the teachers here by now, so they just had to stall for time. Then he decided to get closer. He was confident in himself because he was able to defeat Ryan in a duel and he would do well here. Sharon got into a state of mind and rushed to the guys and shouted to let the girl go. As he approached them, he began to feel something strange. His head was pounding and he fell to the ground. Emma shouted for him to get out of the spirit state. This influence he was feeling was anti-magic, because if you don't, you can lose the ability to use your magic and go crazy. Sharon heard the girl's words, but his senses began to separate from him. His consciousness seemed to be splitting into pieces. He began to recall his teacher's words to cope with the impact. In the end, the anti-magic and the state of mind are waves, if he can increase his strength enough so that they can't get inside. The guys began to increase the pressure on Sharon, but having gathered all his strength, the boy began to reflect the waves of anti-magic back. The boys were shocked and tried not to panic, but as Sharon got closer, the more he influenced the boys, the more they began to fall down, powerless. Emma was shocked and didn't even realize what was happening because she couldn't use her state of mind. The anti-magic was gone and her body was free. When she was free, she saw Sharon's state of mind. It was cold and strong. His nose was bleeding, and he felt some movement under his feet, as if he had stepped on a small worm. Jake started screaming in shock because there were 6 of them, and Sharon was able to defeat them all by himself. He concluded that Sharon specialized in anti-magic, and that's why he got into the school on a special recommendation. The boy got up and even tried to challenge Sharon to a magic duel. As soon as he started to attack, Emma hit him in the face. She was very angry with the guy. Sharon started to pull her away from him. After a few minutes of fighting, they fell down and Emma was unconscious. But the girl did not lie there for long. Less than a minute passed and she jumped to her feet. When she saw Chiron, she said that such a weakling had the courage to come here and fight. Chiron thought she would not thank him. The girl stretched out her hand to help him up because if the teachers saw them here, they would be done for. But Shiron asked Serial to tell the teachers and they would be here soon. Emma realized that they would be in trouble if the academy got involved. The wizards will want to know the exact reasons for what happened. They never let things go to waste. A sparkle appeared in the sky, and Emma shouted that they needed to run as fast as they could. They would think about the consequences later. They didn't have time to run away. The girl wanted an old carefree teacher to come and look the other way. But it didn't happen as she had hoped. Sina, who has the element of ice, and Ted, who has the element of fire, arrived, the most fiery teachers in the school, and they are finished. Serial arrived with the teachers and immediately ran to her friend. Ted used the sun spell. When Sharon noticed this, he remembered that he had heard of its heavy use. The teachers were outraged that their best student was in such a situation. Shing approached Sharon and told him that they had come because they were in danger and asked him to explain what had happened. At this point, Jake jumped in and said he could explain. He said that out of personal animosity, he had invited them to a duel. According to him, this often happens to people their age. But the teachers knew about the threatening letter, and they were using anti-magic, which violated the school's charter. But Jake said it was the only way they could protect themselves from Emma, and added that the girl had broken the rules first when she attacked him in the library, so he asked her to duel. And Sharon had come here instead of calling the teachers, which Jake's logic was that Sharon and Emma were hiding something. Jake's plan was to blow this situation out of proportion, no matter what the cost. Once their secret was out, the local newspapers, national agencies, even the church would know. Seeing interrupted the boy's speech and emphasized that he had broken the rules. All of the above did not deny the fact that he and his friends had used anti-magic and broken the rules for using it to attack. They knew that Emmy's and Sharon's minds could be damaged and they would probably say goodbye to their lives, and that's enough for expulsion. Ted said in the teacher's ear that the Ardius house was a lifeline for the entire academy without their donations. But Sina interrupted her husband and said that it was the teacher's duty to guide students to the right path, and even if they couldn't do that, the academy would be better off without him. But Jake, realizing that his lies were not believed, decided to attack because he was sure that they would expel the teacher. But not him. His family is rich, so everyone would bow down to him. He advised the teacher to take the chance and make sure she understood how the world worked. Sina was outraged by the boy's self-confidence. She sent 1,000 icicles of ice at him. Shironu was surprised. The teacher did not even touch his clothes. It means that she controls the smallest details of the spell, which is why she is called a genius of ice magic. Jake has long been harming students, but the academy has turned a blind eye, not punishing him for his actions. The academy is not a place where they are taught for money. On the contrary, it teaches what money can't buy, to become a sorcerer, because that's why he's come a long way, and now he's destroying the precious memories of this place with his own hands. Jake and the other dark wizards repented and dreamed of becoming wizards again, but that happened much later, and now, as soon as their wounds are healed, they will go to the punishment room to pay for their deeds. In the end, the inevitable happened, and meanwhile, Sharon and Emma were in the detention room. Teacher Ted asked Sharon why he didn't tell them right away, because he should have told the teachers about the situation in the first place, but instead he went to rescue the more skillful senior student himself. The teacher asked him to explain his actions. As soon as the thought of telling the truth crossed Sharon's mind, Emma said that he was her boyfriend. Everyone present was shocked. The next day, Serial was telling the girls how Sharon had romantically rescued Emma on a white horse. The girl was very angry with her friend for spreading rumors, but because of him, no more guys would stick to Emma, so she forgave her. Let's go back to the day of the incident. Emma explained to teacher Ted that she had seen Sharon before, when they were children. The fact that she met him at the University of Magic was fate, and that's why she started dating him. The next day, Emma and her friend were having lunch. Serial asked her friend about her relationship with Sharon, but they decided to focus on their studies. Emma thought that she didn't have time to pretend to be in a fake love affair and that Sharon needed to have a normal school life. He was doing well and she didn't like him. After lunch, they met by chance with Sharon. She asked him to call her informally in private because they were closer than just high school friends. Then they went to class. Sitting down in his seat, he heard someone say that he got into the academy because of his pretty face and wasted time dating instead of studying, and that's why he still can't use magic. 2 days ago, rumors began to spread that Chiron couldn't cast magic, that he was the last in his class, that he was the son of wealthy parents and had never lifted anything heavier than a spoon in his life. When he came into the classroom, everyone was silent, and when he sat down at his desk, the student who was sitting there would leave before he sat down to take another seat, which made Chiron sad. He didn't even have to ask why. They were talking so loudly as if they wanted him to hear them. Emma could get hurt because of him. In the practice of the state of mind for each class, Chiron felt that the touches of his state of mind were annoying to those present. Atella approached him and asked about his progress. It was difficult for Chiron to avoid the form of evasion when he tries to determine the state of mind from the body. It seems as if his consciousness is following him, but it was meant to be that way, because he is a convergent type who follows his nature, which is why his mind gathers in the form of a sphere. This type does not go well with the evasion form and requires additional manipulation. Sharon had no problems with the other forms, and the teacher suggested demonstrating them in the visible area. Atella saw that Sharon did not like this idea and said that it was not necessary to do it now, but he was the only 7th grader who could do all the forms, and she wanted to see it. The teacher remembered that the boy had expressed a desire to use the visible area on the first day, but now he didn't want to. She realized that she was afraid of the reaction of the other students. But still, Chiron wanted to show his skills and went to the middle of the class in a visible form. Chiron began to demonstrate the shapes one by one. The ability to change shapes is one of the conditions for moving to the next grade, and if Chiron manages to do this, he will stay away from the 7th grade and change his position. Atella watched him and thought that the boy knew the basics and could change forms faster than a 6th grader. There will be no problems with his transition to the next grade. The last form Chiron showed was the evasion form. He had never succeeded in it and did not want to demonstrate it in front of everyone, but for the sake of the teacher's instructions, he was ready to show his failure. The key, just like during practice, when the state is close to him, he can move it. But as soon as it separates, it seems as if his subconscious mind goes after it. Chiron also felt the thoughts and whispers of the students. They were unpleasant and demotivated him. He didn't understand why people enjoyed other people's failures, why they all wanted him to fail so badly. But Chiron remembered that he had come here to become a magician. Meanwhile, Teacher Sina was reading Teacher Ted's report on the incident. She reasoned that he was resisting her with a common form of defense. Anti-magic is so dangerous that even a specialist needs an artifact as an intermediary. It is as dangerous as it is difficult, but it's like Chiron managed to defeat them. He has more mental strength than the other student. Her reflections are shared with Itella, who came over after school. They sat down to tea, and the teacher told Shin that thanks to the visible zone, she was able to see the shape of the slope. It lasted about 4 seconds, which was impressive. A few days later, in the 7th grade, Xing's teacher was teaching a chemistry class. She ended the class early and said that she had an important announcement, that it had been decided to transfer Chiron to the 5th grade early and that he would join the new class tomorrow. Suddenly, one of the students jumped out of her seat and shouted that she was against the decision. Then other students started to join in the protest, because how can a student who doesn't know how to use spells be transferred to the next grade? But still, the teacher saw no obstacles to the transfer, and when she reported it, another student stood up and said that it was discrimination, because the state of mind is not all magic, and if Chiron can cast at least one spell, he will make such a decision. And even if you compare Chiron's grades with other students, he's the last one in the class. According to them, he could not even learn the theoretical material properly, and if he was transferred, they were going to report it to the student council. The teacher immediately realized that there was something behind it that she hadn't suspected. She was surprised that the students were so angry. It didn't look like a normal protest against injustice. It seemed to be some kind of personal conflict. After school, Sina was sitting in her office. Suddenly, a student named Maria came in and told her what she had seen. About a week ago, everyone had started to ignore Chiron, and now they were gossiping and interfering with his studies. She saw everything and knows who was gossiping and inciting others. The teacher thanked the girl for the hypnosis and promised to look into it. Meanwhile, night fell. Chiron was studying books and didn't notice that it was 12 o'clock in the morning. He gathered his things from the library and headed home. When he got out of the shower, someone knocked on his door. A woman's voice asked if he had a minute, but he wasn't expecting anyone. It was Sina's teacher, who said that she wanted to talk to him earlier, but he was not at home, so she came so late. The teacher came over to Chiron's desk while he was making tea and noticed a sheet of paper with the boys' grades on it. When she first saw them, she noticed something strange. The number of points in all subjects was low, but the same. It was as if he wanted to improve all of them in all subjects at once. They sat down, and the teacher said that she had been told that his classmates were bullying him. But Chiron replied that there was no reason to worry. He was sorry that he did not manage to make friends, but he could not do anything about their attitude to him. The most important thing for him is to be true to himself. If you think about it, even if everyone in the 7th grade thinks he's wrong, it's only the opinion of 40 people. The very next day, Sina's teacher raised the issue of Chiron's transfer at a teacher's meeting. She said that the whole class was bullying the boy just because he couldn't use magic. It's a normal story in junior high school. Many kids are stupid and some have no talent at all. But Teacher Ted has objected to Sharon's transfer. He knows the boy is talented. The problem is that he can't use magic, and he has to take into account the negative reactions of the other student. Perhaps other students are weaker than him in terms of omnipotence, but they are head and shoulders above him in terms of omniscience. Such a decision could have a negative impact on students and reduce their motivation to learn. The teachers began to quarrel, but the principal asked them to calm down and offered one solution. The very next morning, on the high-level class bulletin board, all the students were shocked to learn that the academy was giving all 7th graders a chance to transfer early. The students discussed what they would do when they transferred. Some of them liked the idea of moving to the senior class. Others were afraid of it. Emma overheard what others were saying about Sharon at the booth and realized why he had been avoiding her lately. Serial, who was standing next to her, asked where she was going. Emma turned and said that she really wanted to hit the boy because he hadn't told her and she was going to gather the whole 7th grade. Her friend tried to stop her, saying that if her loved one found out that she was an outcast, if she gets involved now, she might hurt his pride. The girl listened to her friend and stopped, but it would be difficult for a 7th grade student to master temporalization in a new class. If the problem was only a difficult spell, it is very dangerous for someone who has never studied magic. So Serial suggested that she teach it to the girl herself, but Emma yelled at her, saying that he wouldn't accept her help and that she didn't have time because the exam was coming up. If Sharon couldn't do it on his own, he wasn't worthy of being her boyfriend. In the evening, Emma put on a black robe, put on a hood, and flew to the boys' dormitory to see Chiron. She did it definitely not out of feelings for him, but simply to help because she was also involved. When the girl flew to the window of the boys' room, she saw that Chiron was not alone, but with his teacher, Sina. The teacher suspected that the girl was sneaking into the men's dormitory every night, but Emma interrupted her and said that it was not a misunderstanding. She came here for the first time because Chiron said they shouldn't be seen together, so she decided to come secretly. The teacher calmed the girl down and they started talking about the exam. The teleportation exam is dangerous because light has absolute speed. No matter in the world can surpass it. A teleportation spell uses this speed to transcend the boundaries of space and time. Although it seems infinitely difficult, even a beginner can master teleportation. According to this theory, the speed of light is divided into 4 categories, and teleportation requires light speed magic. The spell can be used at a speed of at least 1/100th of the speed of light. However, this will cause the level of photonization to drop and the body weight to decrease significantly. Despite the easy theory, there is a danger of collision. There is only one place where it is safe to practice, and the teleportation exam is already taking place there. It's an impassable bridge, 1,000 meters above sea level. The first person to finish on the examen will win, but if no one finishes, the winner will be the one who crosses the longest distance. The training ground will be set to the first level of difficulty, and the 7th grade students will be using the necessary measures to earn the danger. But the teachers are worried about the students themselves. If the desire to win reaches a peak, they will attack each other. Sharon wondered if he could do it. He didn't want to confront the whole class alone. He was even more concerned about the fact that someone might get hurt. Was it right to agree to this? Sina said that she had wanted to see the boy in the 5th grade since the entrance exam. It seems that her greed only added to his problem, but Sharon didn't think the teacher was to blame. But she felt guilty about the unjustified difficulty of the exam, so she planned to do everything in her power. But Emma said that what Sina did would make things even worse. Given how important this exam is, if any spirit finds out that the teacher who is taking it is training Sharon, his chances of winning will disappear, so she offered to teach the boy herself. Sina agreed with the girl, but remembered that she wanted to take the exam in the final year, so she would not have time to teach Sharon. Let's move on to the final year. Everyone envies students who are recommended by professional wizards. The graduates are considered pre-professional, and because they attend a respected institution, they are featured in the journals of the Royal Academy of Magic. However, as soon as you step into the classroom, you can forget about school leisure. All that awaits you are endless competitions and hellishly hard training. From the very beginning, Emma wanted to get there before all her classmates. Sharon asked if it was too early for their age. The girl thought it was all his fault because he was making very fast progress and the only place he could go was to the graduation class. In general, Emma promised to help Sharon, even though she was busy, but still Sina's teacher insisted that she should take care of the preparation. Each insisted on their own way, and after 5 minutes of hypocritical bickering, Emma turned to Sharon and asked him to choose between her and the teacher. Unexpectedly for everyone, the boy said that he would rather do everything himself. He didn't realize what he was in for. Everyone hires expensive tutors to master the spell, and all his classmates are against him. Emma argued that this is something that can't be learned on your own. He asked Sina to believe in him. Chiron could not say that he would pass, but he would do everything not to regret his decision. The teacher accepted the boy's decision. Sina had to leave. This time she turned a blind eye to the fact that she had broken into the men's dormitory through the window, but there would be consequences next time. Emma and Chiron were uncomfortable alone, and the girl hurried to leave. But before she did, she asked the guy why he didn't tell her that someone was hurting him, because it was not just his problem. Chiron answered that he didn't want to distance himself from the girl, because when he came to the academy and saw her name on the first place, he immediately wanted to try his best to catch up with her. But he didn't even expect things to turn out like this. The relationship between them is already strange, and if he said he was being bullied, it would have become even stranger. But Emma didn't believe what he said. She thought it was strange that he kept calling her a high school girl with a sweet smile, but he was trying to get close to her from behind like a coward. If he really wanted to surpass her, he should have stopped calling her a high school girl. faced her face to face on equal terms, but if he couldn't keep up with her, he would call her a high school girl for the rest of his life. The girl flew out the window and the boy was left alone. He realized that Emma would not help him, but he is sure that the offenders are watching his every move. He will have to achieve everything on his own. There is 1 month left before the exam. The next day, after class, all the students were discussing their preparations for the exam. In the meantime, Chiron had collected a bunch of books for self-study. But the problem of implementation remained. The environment that a wizard faces in real life is constantly changing. Studying the theory was difficult for Chiron, but he was sure that he was not given an impossible task. Even Sina's teacher had said that teleportation was easy enough to learn, but what if he failed to master it because he had never studied magic? Meanwhile, Slidermark, Chiron's classmate, was practicing and was getting good at teleportation. The tutor told him that teleportation could not be perfected in just a month, but if he quickly studied the materials necessary for the test and devoted the rest of the time to practice, he would surely pass the exam. He told his servant to keep an eye on Chiron. Let us return to Chiron. As he read the books, he reflected that he had done all he could. He had spent a lot of time trying to understand omnipotence and memorized every obligatory theory, and although he was unsure of himself, time was running out. First of all, it is necessary to reproduce the theory of photonization in the state of mind. The person who is between omnipotence and omniscience is none other than him. One has to erase oneself between them. When the sorcerer in this state sees the outside world using supernatural potential and, as a result, can control reality. There are 9 days left until the showdown. Many days of grueling training are behind him. Chiron's face was covered in wounds. His first experience with teleportation had failed, and he had no choice but to take a chance to correct his mistakes. Chiron trained diligently every day, but he couldn't perfect his skills. Tomorrow is the showdown, and as soon as he fixes one mistake, another one appears. There was no time to make any more changes. It had to work as it was. Chiron gathered his thoughts and tried to teleport, but fell down in a second. Lying on the floor, he tried to gather his thoughts and get up, but fell asleep. Morning came. A tutor came to Mark Slider's room and asked how he was feeling, but the boy was sure that today he would go to the 5th grade. The girl wished the boy good luck at the exam and wanted to go into the classroom, but he held the door with his hands and said that he knew she was looking for the teacher's office and had told them everything. The girl sat down on the floor and cried. Mark went to his friend's classroom and asked them if everything was ready to go ahead with the plan. She planned that 2 of them would approach Chiron at the start, and 2 more people would guard Mark. On the first floor, the jump distance was 10 meters. They were to hold him until at least 10 people had gone ahead. Mocker promised to hire tutors for the boy, and since his father is a technical consultant for the Sorcerers Association, he would help them in any way he could. The student Serial, watching with binoculars, was looking for a good spot to see everything. Emma, who was standing behind her, grumbled because she was too busy to watch the 7th graders, but she was still worried about Chiron. Meanwhile, Ted added that she could give up if she was afraid. Students had to know that in the process of learning magic, they could die. As soon as one guy told Chiron to stand next to him, the first step of Mark's plan was completed. He reasoned that Chiron would fall in 10 jumps. The first one to time the jump correctly would finish. It would be impossible to close the gap, even if they made several jumps. 3 seconds had passed since the start of the test. With 5 meters to go, the first group began to teleport. One by one, the students gave up because they didn't have enough strength. Jake realized that Chiron could become the first if he continued in the same spirit. But his team was not among the students, and he would not be able to realize his plan. Meanwhile, by the end, the last group was behind them, having used the spell before everyone else out of fear. As expected, the students unable to overcome fear were the first to fail. All the students in the last group failed. Many in the middle group also failed. Mark realized that he had overestimated his strength and underestimated Chiron's abilities. The distance between them became much greater, and the boy did not look tired, although at the beginning of the exercise it seemed that he was about to drop dead. Atella's teacher, observing Chiron, thought that the boy was very capable. He constantly used compulsion and repeated the same order of actions like a machine. Meanwhile, Mark's actions are noticeably unstable. He is the best in the class, but he is young, and therefore in a hurry. Emma reasoned that ordinary sorcerers learn to consciously use the unconscious realm, but he is different. He seems to be controlling the unconscious in a direct way, which is something that cannot be taught. Mark felt that his strength was running out, and he ordered the remaining students to begin. One of them was going to squeeze out the remnants of his mental strength, and maybe he could do it at least once. Chiron heard strange sounds that indicated that someone had broken his sequence of actions. He saw the same student in front of him and realized that he was going to crash into him, but Chiron was able to dodge the guy and he fell. Because of the disruption of the order of actions, the accumulated fatigue came over him. He started to lose consciousness, but he was still holding on. A fifth Mark, but he couldn't catch him, and Mark flew across the circle and activated the untraceable bridge mechanism on the 10th level. Sina shouted that the exam should be stopped, because this test was for moving up 2 levels, and the principal ordered to signal the end of the exam. Meanwhile, it was Maria. She told Ted that if Mark transferred, she would be in hell again, so the plan was fine with her. The teacher said that the elevator had been stopped, and that if she didn't want to, she didn't have to open the door. Meanwhile, Mark was outraged by the termination of the examen because he was close to winning. He really wanted to win so that she would not give up. He might not get another chance to get rid of Chiron. And the boys went to the maze. The teachers were shocked because it was more than dangerous. If you act rashly because you are blinded by greed, it is impossible to find the right way in this maze. Mark was only interested in who would win, because after such a prank, they would be expelled anyway. But if he could impress them, his skills would be recognized. Ted told the girl that when she first got to the academy, he was in the graduating class. He was always the last one. In the 5th grade, he was stuck for 5 years and began to get angry at his friends for moving on easily. One day, the principal scolded him severely. Back to the story, Mark reached a place where the path was blocked. He suddenly began to lose strength and started screaming to be rescued, and Chiron grabbed him by the collar so that he wouldn't fall. Chiron realized that these traps are a kind of maze, and to find the way out, you need to analyze the scheme from afar. So they climbed up. The trap followed them. Flying up the mountain did not help, so he decided to return. The students were shocked by Chiron's actions. Many thought he got into the academy through connections, not abilities. Unexpectedly for all the teachers, the principal ordered to continue the exam. All the responsibility was on him. Meanwhile, the trap looked and moved as if it were alive. Chiron could not foresee anything. The pattern of movements is very chaotic. Because he was trying to save Mark, his situation was getting worse. He realized that he needed to feel the whole instruction and at the same time focus on it. Sharon had done this before. It's like using a form of evasion. Watching this, the director reasoned that danger multiplies opportunity, but usually the limit is reached when you are satisfied with your achievements. However, with this guy, he felt neither satisfied nor thirsty. This sight shocked him. Chiron does not dwell on anything. He has no extraneous thoughts. The strength of his state of mind is close to 99.9%. He calculates his way through the trance. Attila has recognized his outstanding talent, but this time he is in real danger. Moving on to Chiron, he thought the distance between the obstacles had become smaller. He couldn't cover these 10 meters with teleportation. Then he decided to split the teleportation into 1/10. He succeeded and reached the next trap. But he couldn't go straight through. The space was too narrow. The students were fascinated by Chiron's actions because it seemed impossible, because light can only travel in a straight line, but it was simple. If you divide the circle into parts, you get an infinite straight line, and then you can split the teleportation distance into 1,000. It's not about calculations, it's about feelings. In other words, it's insight. Meanwhile, Sharon reached the Dragon's Maze. Sina flew to Ted to check why the exam was not ending. At this time, Mark regained consciousness and was panicked when he saw the monster in front of him. Sharon realized that he needed to memorize the sequence in which the maze was created. Maria left the room. Sina panicked and reported that Sharon and Mark were still in the test area. A second before Attila arrived, Chiron reassured that he was still alive. Using his state of mind, he discovered that there were only 9 teleportations on the way out. He chose one with him, but he was wrong. It was impossible to escape with Mark by this way. But suddenly Chiron got out, but after he came to, he couldn't remember anything. The students ran up to the boy and congratulated him on his transition to the 5th grade. Sina and Ted returned to the playground. The woman was upset that she had missed Sharon's passing, but there was still an important question. They crossed the finish line at the same time, so they needed confirmation. She asked the director to announce the winner. But the director was in his own mind. He couldn't believe that Chiron had managed to show them such a bright light, the light of the Milch family. Ted thought that this nickname was given to the man who had redefined the photon and was even awarded the Golden Circle by the Emperor. However, because of his outstanding talent, Sharon had a spark of greed for just a second. The director indulged in memories of the past when he saw the talented boy. He envied his innocent desire for magic, and he said that only one person would be considered to have passed the exam, but he also admired everyone who took part in it. May the bravery they have shown today become a driving force and lead the world into the future. The person who passed the exam is Sharon Ariani. Mark went out and bowed to Chiron. He apologized and said that as a sorcerer, he would take full responsibility. He realized that he had been wrong about Chiron all along. Emma was about to leave the set when Chiron called her and told her that he had fulfilled his promise and would catch up with her soon. But the next morning, when Chiron woke up, he had no memory of it at all. Later, a meeting of the disciplinary committee was held. Maria humbly admitted all her actions and expected to be punished. However, Sharon, Mark, and even the warden Brad, who had been subjected to a sleep spell, declared that they were against punishing Maria. The other disciples, realizing their mistake, began to confess their misdeeds. They even revealed a plan to interfere with Sharon's exam, and the situation got out of hand. The principal who announced the verdict understood the situation Maria was in. She did not launch the mechanism with the intention of harming anyone, so disciplinary measures would be taken according to the rules of the academy. But Sharon asked to have the floor. He said that he ignored the signal to stop the exam and headed into the maze. Besides, he had no choice but to drag Mark with him to this dangerous place. Everything turned out the way the principal wanted. The students were unable to see the truth while they were blinded by rivalry, pride, and envy, and in order to become a decent sorcerer, they confessed their misdeeds. For the first time since the Academy's founding, a decision was made in which everyone was punished. Mark and Maria were suspended from classes for 2 months, and the other students for 1. In the evening, Chiron came to his room and lay down on the bed. He was so tired that he did not realize how he fell asleep. 3 days later, he woke up to the sound of the piano playing. While getting ready for class, he noticed a notebook on his desk. It helped him a lot to memorize the rules of magic. Emma had lent him the notebook, and he decided to return it today during their joint practice. Later, in the second joint training room, Sharon went up to Emma and gave her a basket of apples as a way of thanking her. He thought she liked apples because he had seen drawings of apples on strawberries in her notebook. The girl didn't like this unexpected gift and ran away. After what happened, Emma passed the exam to be promoted to the senior class with flying colors, but it seems that a problem has arisen in her smart head that has no solution. A month has passed. The 7th grade students who returned from a month-long suspension each time they had a class together took Chiron's seat as if he were the dreaded senior. When he had already taken his seat, Serial came up and asked to sit next to him. They started talking, and the girl said that she was going to be like Emma and go to the senior class. She was going to graduate and live a normal life, but Sharon and Emma had inspired her. She decided she didn't want to waste her youth on that, and Emma seemed to have decided to become a soldier. Chiron was shocked to hear this, because if there is a war, all wizards should take part in it because it is their duty. That's why students are encouraged and supported in various ways. Emma's specialty is using magic against single targets. Obviously, she will be involved in reconnaissance operations. Starting from the 5th grade, it is worth thinking about working as a wizard. If a student is good at something, it will be a huge concrete advantage. Serial left, and the boy was thinking. His thoughts were interrupted by a guy named Nady, a friend to whom Chiron is grateful. He is the only one who talks to him despite his shyness, and although he has average grades, his unusual omnipotence allows him to control lightning. Everyone here has their own unique peculiarity. 7th grade was very different from 5th grade. Although Chiron and the other students were the same age, he felt more mature. 2 other boys came up to them and asked what they thought. Chiron wondered if they would start to keep their distance from him if he didn't understand what they were talking about. The boy expected it to be about studies, chemistry, or literature. But she asked who they liked more, teacher Atella or Sina. The boys started discussing it, and their opinions were divided and they started to quarrel. Shironu didn't want to take part in such discussions, but the boys asked him for his opinion. He understood that there were no problems in school life. He needed to get along with everyone, but he respected both teachers. As soon as Chiron opened his mouth to say his opinion, the boys left. They were scared of Iruki coming into the classroom, but he heard what the boys were saying. In his opinion, only children ask such questions. Iruki reached out to Chiron to introduce himself because it was the first time they had met. Although he had heard a lot about him, Chiron recognized the boy's voice and remembered how he had helped him in one of his classes. Chiron began to thank him because he had successfully used the evasion form with his support. Iruki said he was bored and left. On his way to the door, he asked Chiron to be careful because there were a lot of weirdos in the 5th grade. Nade said that he was always like that, but if you get to know him better, he's not a bad person. He told Chiron that the boy was a genius, and then the boy entered a state of mind and changed his form to evade. Chiron was surprised that he did it so quickly. Perhaps he was the only one in the entire kingdom who could do this. Atella, the teacher, was teaching the 4th grade when she noticed that Iruki was firing. She ordered him to stop, but the process had already begun and the students began to run away. Chiron stood there mesmerized. He realized that the boy specialized in a form of evasion and fire magic. Iruki is the weirdest kid in the 5th grade. His social skills are almost zero, and his personality is so-so. But the reason why Iruki is called a genius is that he specializes in only one area. Specifically, Iruki is the king of computational physics. For example, he can calculate what will happen in experimental conditions at absolute zero or temperatures above 100 million degrees, or determine any date in 40,000 years in a minute. However, in other areas, he was challenged and asked why he did not study other subjects. In his mind, everything could be explained by numbers, even literature. For example, a face reddened with anger is a poetic expression that can be explained by a simple chemical process inside the body. If the balance between the brain and autonomic nerves is disturbed by stress, blood pressure begins to fluctuate and the pulse becomes irregular. The teacher was already furious after the boy's behavior and simply threw him out. At that time, Shiron was sitting in the classroom with Nade and talking about Iruki. Nade knew a lot about everyone, but the boy was a little worried. Their conversation was interrupted by a girl who came to their desk. She asked Shiron if he wanted to join their research group. She was researching data on teleportation magic, and if someone with photon magic skills joined them, their research would advance quickly. If she passes the research paper, she won't have to spend time on certification during the holidays, and they can study together during the rest of the time. But Sharon refused because, in his opinion, his knowledge of the material was not sufficient. Nade was upset that Shiron refused because this research group was quite famous. In his opinion, the boy refused because of the high school student Emma. Shiron didn't understand how this was connected, but he kept quiet. The real reason is his lack of knowledge. It was hard for him to improve his grades. He had no time to dream about a research group. Shiron asked Nade what groups he was in. He told him that he was not only a member, but also the head of the group. All of the other members had graduated, so he was the one who got the position. Sharon thought that if there were graduates in the research groups, then it must be more solid than the others. Nade invited her to see their lab, and after class they went there. It seemed to him that Sharon was not interested in research, but he agreed. After a while, they got to the lab. This is the magical Ita's storeroom. It contains all the teaching aids of the academy. It is a modern storeroom. You put your belongings in a cell, and they will move to the room you need on their own. She went inside. The guy kept saying that Sharon would be surprised by what was inside. He told us that they use everything inside, and every time someone finds the item they are looking for, the structure of the storage room changes. In other words, no one would find it here. They came to a door that read, Community for the Study of Supernatural Psychic Sciences. Sharon was surprised because he did not know that the academy studied mysticism. Nade went on to say that they study spirits and ghosts, the afterlife, aliens, hell, gods, and all that. When they entered the room, they saw Iruki writing something on a big shocker. Their group has a bad reputation, so they can't reveal the names of the members, which is why Nade didn't tell Shiron about him. Iruki approached Shiron and said hello, and then whether the atoms would still remain if you destroyed the substance. Shiron replied that a huge amount of latent energy would be released. Iruki shook hands again and praised the boy for the correct answer. There's a lot of latent energy inside, so much that it could destroy an entire city, and then people could get hurt. Shiron remembered that the director had told them that they were sorcerers who had to think about the impact of their magic on the world. And Iruki thinks that it's okay to sacrifice innocence for the sake of his desire to satisfy his mental needs. The boy was already very angry at Iruki's words, because he believed that others did not care if you were a genius. In Shiron's opinion, it's better to be an idiot than a genius who puts people in danger. But Iruki continued to irritate the boy and said that a bunch of geniuses lead a crowd of idiots. History confirms this. What he hated most was idealism. Shiron was very angry and left. Nade did not understand what had just happened. Iruki explained that he had deliberately provoked the boy because he considered him a rival. During the teleportation exam, Shiron thought very fast because he was in the maze of law. This is impossible without splitting time. At that moment, he had to achieve a time split of 10,000ths of a second. This is the mystery of insight. It is more precise than knowledge and faster than effort. You can't beat the speed of clairvoyance by conscious calculation. He was going to find out with a rapid-fire test. The next day, Sharon was in class. The students in the class said that the test was 2 weeks away. During the test, you need to use active magic, hit targets, and earn points. Those who do not have an attack-type spell, such as healing or support wizards, can also participate. All you need to do is get rid of the targets that appeared in one stage to move on to the next. All you need to do is hit the target quickly and accurately. However, Shiron did not know how to control active magic, so he went to the teacher, Sina. To use omniscience-level magic, you need at least 60 points. Teacher Sina praised him for his diligent study of chemistry. She wasn't teasing. He really understood the material perfectly and was using all of it at the same time, a field in which only a partial knowledge is used. Teleportation magic, which arises from the theory of photonization, is a passive magic that turns a body into photons. That's why Shiron didn't even think about it. Sina's teacher gave him 2 books about active magic. At first glance, it looked useless. However, the prospects for ejecting photons are quite bright. Light has the highest speed, and a straight line has the advantage of being easier to control. In the ivory tower, where wizardry is studied, It is expected that photon emission will become an innovation in information communication. It is already well enough studied and used in various magical devices that they know nothing about. If they continue in this vein, photon emission will break into a new area of magic and it will have an advantage when released. After talking to his teacher, Chiron went to practice. Of course, magic does not come from the hands, but from the center of the state of mind. However, it is easier for the boy to summon magic by imagining the photon emission coming from his palm. Teacher Atella walked into the training area. Her costume was revealing and shocked the students, and she was not wearing glasses. The boys at the table next to Chiron assumed that the teacher had just come from practice because she was a popular bishop of the Karsus monastery. There, she was in charge of protecting the 12 holy relics. There are only 12 bishops in the whole world, and one of them is teacher Atella. She received the title of Jonah from the kingdom thanks to her mental power. The teacher announced that each class would have a similar practical lesson as the one just finished. Today they will learn a technique that will increase omnipotence. She brought a student from the graduation class to demonstrate, the spiritual and verbal sorcerer, Samuel. A young man with long blonde hair walked into the classroom and said he was only here to help the students. Samuel specializes in Kodadama magic. It is closely related to the topic of today's lesson, so the teacher asked the students to concentrate and watch carefully. The boy came to the center of the playground and said that Kodadama magic uses power to strengthen spells, and then he began to demonstrate ordinary hurricane magic. After the hurricane magic demonstration, Samuel asked us to remember this magic power, because he was going to strengthen the magic with Kodadama and said a spell. Wild Mother Earth, I wish to borrow your power. Please take my hand. Looking at everything from the heavens, I put the history of several generations into a single moment. The temple of nature lives in my heart. I put the will of the sorcerer into that land, singing songs full of praise and glorification. An ashen flash can set something on fire, and a hot wind can cause a hurricane. Bound in spirit to the body, we are drawn to us. A sorcerer is not afraid of the power of a lion. With the sun-bearing ocean and the ocean-bearing earth, with the earth-bearing wind and with the wind of 100 million years, I will achieve boundless devotion. The students were already getting bored with this long spell. But Samuel doesn't just recite standard spells, he puts his will into them. Of course, he doesn't just recite them, he says them word by word, with an understanding of their value in reflecting his desire. It is these words that enhance the magic. This is the principle of Kodadama magic, but the process is quite long and cannot be used in battle. Therefore, Samuel was going to show what is called a supersonic technique. Reciting the long spell again, he showed incredible power. When the boy finished, Chiron thought that a wizard graduating from the academy was given an uncertified 10th rank. He couldn't even imagine how strong the teacher Atella, who was a certified 6th rank wizard, was. Samuel left, and the teacher began to tell him that the students would not need to use the Kodadama technique, and she specialized in it. Instead, they would learn a technique called sequence. It will increase omnipotence by concentrating on counting numbers. Numbers are symbols of the following basis, so they are in perfect harmony with the state of mind. Of course, she will not just count them, but, as in Kodadama magic, put meaning into them. She went into the visible zone to show by example, strengthened the state of mind with the help of a sequence, and will call a numerical sequence corresponding to the number 10. Atella's state of mind quadrupled just because of this technique. If in Kodadama magic you need to visualize the spoken words, then in the sequence technique you need to think. The faster you count, the stronger your state of mind becomes. It will not increase, but strength, accuracy, and precision, all abilities are enhanced. Of course, the sequence is not omnipotent. If you don't have enough mental strength, this technique will not be effective. Chiron realized that thanks to this, he could form photons. All the students began to focus and practice. Chiron managed to count up to 1,000 per minute. It turned out that counting without doing anything was harder than it seemed. If he hadn't practiced the concept in class, he wouldn't have succeeded. During teleportation, Chiron used a technique that allowed him to feel the heavy counting. Then, with consistency, he could divide the numbers into hundreds and count them all at once in about 10 seconds. As a result, he managed to launch a photon into a tree. Atella was surprised that Chiron had already learned active magic. She approached the boy and asked him to practice in the visible zone. He went into the zone, closed his eyes, and began to strengthen his state of mind with the help of a sequence. Thanks to the fact that the speed of the shot is close to the speed of light, it seemed as if he was aiming and firing at the same time. Combining numbers into large groups and counting them off is a modularity technique used in information magic. Perhaps he learned this skill on the bridge that cannot be crossed. Nade told Haruki that Chiron hadn't been able to do it before, but once he figured it out, he scored 342 points, but Haruki wasn't impressed. He raised his hand and said that he wanted to try as well. Chiron doesn't like Haruki's way of thinking, but it's still interesting. The guy was doing well, and it was clear that he would beat Chiron's score. but he knew that the guy was really strong. Looking closely, he realized that Iruki doesn't look for the target with his eyes, but predicts the movement of the target using the equation of motion, but how he could follow them in a form of evasion after determining their movement. Iruki's score was 548 points. He approached Chiron and asked him how he felt about this result. Chiron replied that it was incredible, because he did not know that the evasion form could be used in this way. For some reason, Chiron's answer disappointed Iruki. He asked if Chiron was interested in knowing how he counted in millions, but he knew that the boy considered him a rival and was unlikely to share. Iruki used the logarithm to lower the unit of account. Chiron thought that this was not even a method. When counting with the logarithm, you can intuitively feel the large numbers, but even if you use the sequence as a way to count, the calculations will become more difficult. This is the savant syndrome. Iruki interrupted the boy's thoughts and said that he didn't have enough skills, so he needed to stop talking about idealism and pretending to be the coolest. But he can't beat him, because no matter how amazing his insight is compared to my calculations, it's no better than a worm. Chiron got angry and left. Rules of the speed test. The final result is determined by the number of targets hit. The test is given 1 minute. The number of targets increases with each level. Even if there is only one target left, you cannot move to the next stage. In addition, the higher the level, the faster the targets are called. You can't summon new targets without destroying the old ones, which will also affect the result. The next day, the results of the speed shooting test were released. The average score is about 400, and so far no one has scored more than 700. Chiron reasoned that assuming he never missed, he needed to reach the 30th level in a minute to get that score, and to do that, he had to complete each stage in 5 seconds. The training began, and in the visible zone, Chiron scored 567 points. He was very happy because he had achieved a higher score than Iruki. But Iruki entered the visible zone right after him and scored 568 points. The difference with Chiron's score was only 1 point. This difference was not a coincidence. Over the next few days, Iruki consistently scored 1 point higher than Chiron. The meaning of the 1 point difference became obvious. To beat him by a point, you had to calculate carefully from the first level. This meant that even if he didn't do his best, it was not difficult for him to beat someone like Chiron. The next day in class, the students discussed the match between Chiron and Iruki. Everyone was wondering what kind of maximum score Iruki could achieve. Chiron was confused because the boy hadn't shown his worth, and he always gives his best every time. The boy's thoughts were interrupted by Nade, who came over and said that he believed in him. And although Nade realized that it was hard for Chiron, they, as spectators, had a lot of fun. Everyone was very interested in whether they could beat the best result. Chiron didn't know who scored the highest score and didn't even think about it. Nade was surprised that he didn't know about his girlfriend's score, because Emma had the best score. She scored 987 points. Meanwhile, Emma and Serial finally met. Emma gave her friend the material she had asked for because she wanted to move on to the final year. But there was no reason to worry, because even though the class was called the senior class, it was no different from the top of the 4th grade. Emma asked how Shirin was doing, and her friend told her about what was happening between him and Iruki. Emma remembered that Iruki had been hitting on her as well. He pretends not to understand the emotions of other people, but in fact uses them to further provoke and win. Later, in the visible zone, Chiron took another trial exam. He could only score 700 points and was very exhausted. The students were shocked because they had never had such a result in the 5th grade. After that, he went to the visible zone of Iruki, and he again scored 1 point more than Chiron. The boy completely lost confidence in himself. He could not win. The class ended, and Chiron went to his room. The exam would be after the weekend, and he had only 3 days. He was sure that in that time he would not be able to find another way to beat Iruki. He tried to practice. Chiron wanted to understand what the reason was. Maybe he had lost his sense of reality because he had been in the academy for aristocrats for so long. In fact, Iruki was not mistaken in his words. Sesshomaru wouldn't listen to someone who didn't have the power. To surpass Iruki, there was no other way but to go beyond numbers. He tried not to think, because if he was lost in his thoughts, he would not be able to see the big picture. The numbers ended and the floor began to crumble. He was sure he was counting numbers. It was a hallucination. It was hard to explain, but numbers exist not only for the sake of counting. It was the day of the 5th grade rapid-fire shooting exam. There was a lot of pressure on the students, so some of them could not stand it. The 4th grade students also came to the exam, including Serial. They started discussing that Iruki might win because he was the one who kept the score. But Serial said that it was too early to tell because a real Ekazamen is played in pairs. With an opponent at your side, the result can change. If the situation is close to reality, then Chiron will have a chance to win. All the students had already passed the exam, and Atella invited the last participants, Chiron and Iruki. Chiron was more focused than ever. The teacher announced the start of the exam. At first, Chiron had more points. The students were saying that Iruki was doing it on purpose, and that he would turn the tables in his favor at the end. Watching the exam, Atella thought that the path seemed so long at first, but once you've been on it, other paths will be faster to overcome. And this also applies to the calculation. Launching modularity. Chiron combines numbers into groups and counts them at that time. This strategy is used when the limit of conscious counting is reached. To do this, he must enter a state of hyperfocus before starting the Ekasmanip. However, if he does so, he will miss at least one matrix and the entire sequence will collapse. Iruki watched Chiron's actions and thought it was a kind of mental doping. He changed the order of counting, which means he is trying his best. Iruki's score began to increase dramatically. The students couldn't figure out whether Iruki had gotten faster or Chiron had gotten slower. One fourth-grade student noticed that Iruki's state of mind had a strange afterimage. An afterimage is a phenomenon of visual perception in which, after a long visual fixation on an object, a person continues to see its final trace. But Serial realized that this was not an afterimage. He had two states of mind. A unique feature of the form of evasion is a divided mind. Moreover, he is simultaneously running two sequences and using logarithm. He may have savant syndrome, but it is a very rare ability. Atella could not believe that this child was hiding such a skill. 15 seconds remained until the end of the screening. It was clear that Chiron would not be the first. He was determined to give it his all, but he couldn't show half of what Iruki was capable of. But he wondered if that was all he was capable of. Chiron was still afraid. He didn't know if he was allowed to go down this path, but he was going to go beyond the numbers. Iruki was confident, because he believed that he was counting faster than Chiron, and if the boy did not speed up, he would not win. The examen was over. Iruki was sure that he had won. He looked at Chiron and saw Serial come up to him and tell him that he had won. Other students began to come up and congratulate him. Iruki came up to the boy and congratulated him on his victory. All the students were surprised that the boy admitted his defeat. Afterwards, he admitted that Chiron was right when he said that life is more important than research. He had a request that from now on, Chiron should be responsible for him. An explosion is just an amount of energy. It is impossible to control it, but if he succeeds, it will become an energy capable of saving 100,000 human lives. A new era begins, and it will begin to fight against the limitations of nature. Of course, Iruki had no faith in this benign idea. If he had said so from the beginning, there would have been no misunderstanding. Iruki was afraid that he would become an untamed force. He said that by defeating him, Chiron had proved the truth of his will, and that he was the only one who could stop him. The boys shook hands and agreed that Chiron would stop Iruki when the time came. When all the students had left, Atella called Chiron to her and asked him if he realized that he could leave. It was because of the zone he had entered. If you enter it again, you can stop being yourself. The space he plunged into is beyond numbers and is called infinite space. Sorcerers call it the function of immortality, and bishops call it nirvana. People can reach infinity. However, those who do so will become nothing. Behind the numbers in that place, he saw a huge emptiness, and this emptiness swallowed him up. Since he was there, he has seen it again and again in his dreams, and this strange feeling that he began to experience from time to time. He consulted his teacher Atella, but they could not find any abnormalities in his body. And lately it seemed as if a ghost was hunting him. Chiron was sitting in Iruki and Nadi's lab because she said it was a supernatural studies group. Iruki said that judging by his story and the speed of space, it was a number that no one on the continent could predict. For fun, we can assume that this place exists, and then it will be called outer space. Nade said he had heard of it before. 200 years ago, a criminal sentenced to death took part in an experiment on the transfer of consciousness. If the soul consists of matter, then it can probably be disassembled into its component parts using electricity. A sealed conductor. In other words, a person is placed in a metal box where an electric current is supplied. However, the experiments were stopped because of their inhumanity. The man sentenced to death survived and regained consciousness a month later, but he knew about the state of countries outside the continent, where he had never been before and had never even heard of. The electricity had disconnected the consciousness, which became ionized and eventually caused electromagnetism, and the strange tingling sensation felt by the convict can be called supernatural. Iruki shouted that Chiron had seen space. Suppose his consciousness was ionized by electricity, and it caused a quantum phenomenon, then there's a chance he went beyond space and time. In the microscopic world, smaller than an electron, things happen that are beyond human understanding. The world is defined only by probability. It cannot be observed and measured at the same time. Let's say the weight of the soul is less than an electron, then the relationship with space will eventually break down and there will be an opportunity to feel outer space. This seems to be exactly the situation of Chiron, but this is just a hypothesis, and Chiron needs to admit that during the rapid fire exam, something went wrong with his photon emission, and after that, he started having nightmares every night. Teacher Atella had already told him that it was a function of immortality. Iruki said he had heard about it once from his father. It's the limit of mathematicians' dreams, a function that can be the key to everything in this world. Of course, this is dangerous because everything is nothing. Sharon decided that he was joining the community of supernatural psychic research. Nade was so excited about this because he really wanted to find out what exactly helped the guy win. And since there were now enough members, they could officially become a group again. But since the group had a bad reputation, Nade wanted to do everything without the teacher's knowledge. Despite Nade's hopes, the safest teacher, Sina, found out about everything when teacher Ted was collecting applications for joining research groups, and one sheet fell out of the pile of applications. This particular sheet was the supernatural psychic research community, and she immediately went to Atella's teacher to tell her the news. Atella didn't immediately see anything wrong with the news, but Sina said that this group was a community of supernatural psychic researchers. Before they became teachers, this group was constantly causing trouble. It is worth mentioning the daily complaints from the parents of the students. Sina did not realize that Chiron chose this group because he is a promising student at the academy, at a time when he should be studying hard. He is doing this. Atella remembered that Nade was now the president of the academy. He is an honorable student. He has a good attitude towards his peers, so she thought there shouldn't be any problem. The current head of the Tormia Magic Association, Micah Gayold, was the president of this group in the past. The next day, Chiron came to the boys to ask why they were not in class, but Iruki was always skipping class, and Nade said he wasn't feeling well. The room was a mess, but even though Chiron had cleaned it yesterday, he decided not to say anything about it and sat down with his books. Iruki approached Nade and asked if he had finished his invention, the invisibility cloak. When Chiron heard about the cloak, he jumped up from the table and shouted that he wanted to see it too. Let's go back to the conversation between Sina and Atella. They said that the problem was not only with Nada, but with the other participants as well. Iruki, the bastard who stays in the 5th grade and pretends to be stupid. Sina was outraged, because if Chiron hangs out with this troublemaker Iruki, he will turn into the same person. He could become the worst bomb of magic, but Atella didn't think it was that critical. Meanwhile, Nade was showing the boys his homemade crafts. Chiron's attention was drawn to the invisibility cloak and the book that was in the box with the craft. When the boy opened it, he saw pictures of girls from the academy and a lot of rumors about them, something like an information booklet. It is not known who is conducting such research, some shadowy group, since the notebook contains many entries about the graduating class, so most likely they are from the graduating class themselves. A community of researchers of supernatural psychic Naku is also called a shadow group. Groups such as the Dark Wizards are childish things. The problem is that the pranks played by the Academy's talented and intelligent students cross all boundaries. They are completely ignored by the Academy's investigation team. Teachers have left the community alone because they are no longer officially a group. Smart guys are trying to revive it. But Sina decided to take advantage of this and disband the community. Teacher Atella asked not to interfere in the research groups for no reason, although she understood that she was just concerned about their future. To foster students' autonomy and sense of responsibility, groups are recognized as independent. They have to be responsible for their own decisions. If adults took away the ability to make choices from children, they could live their whole lives afraid to make choices. Sina believed that the role of the adult is to develop the talent of the students and not to let them go astray. Atella could see how much Sina valued Chiron, but she wanted to give him enough time to decide on his own. But Sina's enthusiasm as a teacher should not be taken lightly. Atella told us that the boy had achieved nirvana during the rapid fire test. Meanwhile, an earthquake broke out in the group's pantry. This happened when one of the teachers influenced the pantry. Chiron was confused, but the boys told him to just sit and wait. Teacher Sina was at the door. She was waiting for the door to open to do an inspection. It would take 3 minutes to call the right room, enough time to hide the evidence. The boys sat down on the sofas and ordered Chiron to behave calmly, because if they catch him, he will not get off with a simple probation. The research room is their territory. If you get scared, they're done for. Sina entered the room and sat down in a chair. Looking at the boys, she thought that the research groups are autonomous. They are completely at the mercy of the students. Even teachers have to follow a certain procedure to express their opinions. So the teacher expected at least some kind of reaction, but their behavior was infuriating. Nade broke the silence and apologized because the teacher had caught them in the middle of a discussion. If the teacher had officially informed them about the visit, they would have given them a warm welcome. Sina decided to get straight to the point and said that she wanted the boys to vacate the research lab. She looked at the reports and found it hard to find a reason not to disband their group. For example, over the past 4 years, they have never provided research results. Another reason for disbanding is the lack of participants for more than a semester, and their budget was reduced. According to the rules, it is possible to keep the group if they provide the results within a month. Nade started begging the teacher to help them. He bowed and said that Sina knows that it is impossible to provide evidence of psychic science. She wanted to disband their research group, which had become the voice of reason in the magical community, fixated on science and logic. She was willing to do anything except make the presentation. and Sina said that she had another condition, to exclude Chiron from the group because an immortal function is not something the academy can handle, and it is very dangerous for a young student. Chiron might disappear forever, because he might become redundant. Excessiveness is a phenomenon in which the consciousness cannot cope with the volume of suddenly awakened abilities, as a dam cannot contain an excessive flow of water. This most frightening symptom can cause a nervous breakdown. But because the community calls it the disease of geniuses, children who miss the time to be treated suffer from it for the rest of their lives. Redundancy is manifested in the use of the dimensionless function. It is difficult to imagine how dangerous it is. A nervous breakdown was quite possible, as after the nightmares, Chiron felt like he was really going crazy. Chiron's academic workload would be reduced, and he would undergo intensive psychotherapy. Sina was ready to take care of herself and prevent what had happened from leaving its mark on him. Nade interrupted the teacher and said that as the president of the group, he was against Chiron's expulsion. He started to get hysterical, and Sina asked him to calm down. Iruki asked the teacher if Chiron didn't cope with the excesses, would it mean that he had reached his limit? He can't die from it. The function is immortal. It is not yet a fully understood area. It is Chiron's state, and they have to trust him. The teacher's experiences went beyond. You could even call it obsession. And then Chiron said that he should have the last word. He was just as scared as the teacher and said sometimes he felt like he was going crazy, but in fact he felt better. He was afraid that this nightmare would end. It seems that then he will no longer have a chance to reveal the secrets hidden in it. If he was asked a question, he would want to find the answer. He wanted to overcome everything, not run away. Sina respected Chiron's decision, so she accepted it. It brought them back to the original conditions, so she expected at least some results from them. Nade almost fainted because the supernatural community never made presentations. If it were possible, then supernatural psychic sciences would already be published in books, yet there is no way to prove the existence of ghosts. And then they saw teacher Sina, dressed very smartly. Nade could think of nothing better than to follow her and find her weakness, to exploit it to prevent the group from disbanding. Iruki said that following an officially certified 6th-level sorcerer was not an easy task, but she could do it with the help of an invisibility cloak. While Nade went to the lab to get the cloak, Chiron had to go with Iruki. Chiron stood there and couldn't understand why the boys didn't use their brains to learn. They followed the teacher to the commoners' neighborhood. They were surprised because nobles don't usually come here for dates. Sina was very careful. She was constantly looking around for people she knew. She came to one house, knocked, and a man opened the door. Nade thought it was the teacher's lover and decided they should go inside. They entered the house through the basement entrance and reached the room from which the voices were coming. A woman's voice behind the door asked when the wife would return. The boys immediately concluded that Sina was meeting with a married man and burst into the room. In the room, they saw the man holding a painting and the teacher posing. Sina was surprised and angry that the boys followed her. They immediately fell to their knees, and Iruki said that it was all because of Nade, and the invisibility cloak belonged to him as well. The man who was with Sina in the kimono asked not to scold the boys. He was sure that the boys had only entered the house because they were worried about the teacher. To defuse the situation, the man went to make tea. When the man returned, they saw a bandage on his eyes, which meant he was blind. His name is Armin, a high school student with whom Sina studied at the same academy. He lost his eyesight because of her. She experienced excess when she was younger. In those terrible days, there was only one thing she could do, just run away. She fell into the river. It was raining and windy at the time. Armin threw himself after the drowning girl. They grabbed onto a log. If they could hold on and swim to the bottom, they would be saved. But they noticed that there was a huge pile of logs floating towards them, which could kill them. Armin held her head so she didn't swim up. They will survive if they kick against it just a little bit. That's how Armin, a brilliant student at the academy, lost his sight and gave up the idea of becoming a sorcerer. Sina was shocked when he recently contacted her and told her that he had become an artist. At this point, Armin returned to the room with tea. Chiron asked permission to watch him paint. They sat down and Armin continued to paint. The boys were amazed at how he could draw. Iruki suggested that the man was using a state of mind. Suddenly, Chiron turned to Armin and asked if he could see. The man took off his blindfold and there was light in the place of his eyes. He said he was waiting for the boy to notice. Chiron pushed Nade to look, but he noticed that no one in the room was moving. It's a spell called a pause. Armin suggested that we talk all the time. He said that he was very worried because he knew that Chiron would soon understand everything. Usually people take in light with their eyes and then rearrange it into visual information, but his eyes are light in themselves. As soon as the man saw the boy and realized that he had experienced the same thing, the function of immortality. The function of immortality is the door to infinity. Those who open it are called openers. Chiron opened this door. The minds of those who succeed in this quickly flow into infinity, and thanks to this, they feel great power and liberation. But there was no reason to worry. As long as he didn't cross the line, his mind would not be destroyed. Chiron said that he was hiding it from his friends, but because of the feeling of the supernatural, it seems as if he is going crazy, and there is some danger. Armin replied that all the symptoms are absolutely normal. The place he reaches is an infinite space, a universe. A person facing an infinite and overwhelming limit will experience immense fear, which, as an effective stimulation, leads to enlightenment, and most discoverers acquire the omnipotence of space. However, the fear that Chiron feels is not related to space. He has encountered something completely different. Once he realizes what causes it, it will disappear, but it is not known exactly how to find out what the anxiety is about. Only time will tell, maybe soon, or maybe it will take a lifetime. Armin felt that the answer was inside Chiron, but he was not in a state to give it a name right now. Perhaps it has something to do with gauge symmetry. Scientists believe that the world is perfect, the perfect fit of the right physics, light that can be explained by mathematics. All of this is similar to the constant speed of light. Perfect symmetry looks like a skillfully arranged product of someone's will. However, as we continued our research, we realized that this symmetry had already been broken. The universe is not perfect. They also do not know what broke this symmetry. Armin was sure that Chiron would be able to cope with this nameless something. The boy thanked the man, and after these words, he really felt better. He wondered why the man did not tell the teacher what he could see. He replied that Sina was worried about him because of the guilt, and that he had not only regained his sight, but he did not want to burden her further. This is not right. Armin continued to paint, and the spell was broken. He was already married. He wanted to help Sina live her own life, so Chiron promised to keep his secret. When the painting was finished, Sina's teacher and the boys hurried home. They were saying goodbye outside the house when Armin's wife arrived. As soon as Armin's wife approached Sina, she immediately took the students and they left. The wife asked Armin if the management would check that Armin's eyes were bright. He had such a stupid expression on his face. Armin asked her to make a contribution instead of idle talk. We had to go from Krias to Kelber. There would be a lot of mutts on the way, but that was nothing for Armin, the eyes of light. Armin said he was going to stick to the contract, so he asked the woman not to talk nonsense. When the teacher left Armin's house, she didn't say a word to the boys, just gave them an angry look. They started shouting that they were hungry and asked to eat before returning to the academy. Sina agreed to feed them, because they would not have time to eat for the rest of the day. They went to a restaurant and ordered different foods. Sina ordered some wine. The boys were surprised that a teacher would drink, but they had broken into someone else's home, so they couldn't object. Nade was glad that Sina drank more and more, because he could take advantage of this and find her weakness. An hour later, Sina was already a little drunk. She started to cry and said that there are so many talented students, but not all of them managed to realize their dreams. At one point, she fell on the table and fell asleep. Chiron tried to wake her up because they had to leave. At that moment, a man came to their table and offered to take the woman in his carriage without the boys. The man began to stretch his hands toward her and say that she had a beautiful body, but Chiron asked him to leave. The man was angry and threatened that they would be expelled on his orders alone. Nade began to work magic on the man and asked him to leave nicely if he didn't want to wet himself right there. Iruki took the man's wallet, which contained his documents. He was an ordinary civil servant, which meant that he couldn't exactly expel Iruki Mercadine, because his family was second-class nobility, a family that has been royal advisors for 3 generations. When the man left, Nade took a picture of the teacher, who was still sleeping on the table. Now they will definitely be able to prevent the group from disbanding. While Nade ran happily down the street with the photo in his hands, Chiron alone was carrying the teacher. Iruki approached him to help with advice. He told him to use the diagram, because if he knew how to use the state of mind, then everything would work out with the diagram. First, you need to close your eyes and focus on your eye. Iruki would ask questions, and Chiron had to follow his voice. First, you need to feel yourself, and then go deeper into yourself. When Chiron went deeper, Iruki asked if he was his. The boy had to breathe deeply and slowly, listen carefully, and answer the questions. Iruki asked him where he had first kissed the dreaded schoolgirl Emma. Chiron opened his eyes and realized that he had been deceived. They walked in silence for a while, and the teacher was still asleep. Finally, Chiron had the courage to suggest that they shouldn't use the teacher's weakness as an argument. Teacher Sina had a very hard and sad day today. She would not want her to go through the pain that she herself has experienced. In the end, Nade gave up, but the past president of the group entrusted her to him. If they disbanded, then... But everything will be fine. At this time, the teacher woke up. She apologized for the inconvenience and said that she would keep quiet about the walkout from the academy. She gave them a month from that day to show the ghost or whatever they wanted. If they really loved their research group, they would proudly convince the academy of it. Nade even agreed to make a presentation, because with it, they will proudly and confidently prove the value of their research group. They will use their brains for learning for once. It's been a long time since the last one. The guys were in ecstasy. They discussed so many topics that they didn't even sleep a wink, all of them inappropriate. Even if they happened in real life, they would not be able to show them during the presentation. 3 days had passed since Sina's teacher had made all the promises. The boys confidently told her that the presentation would be a success, but they were researching supernatural psychic sciences, how they can demonstrate something invisible to the naked eye, and that's why Nade went crazy, and so did Chiron. Chiron wanted to say something to Nade and turned his head in his direction and was terrified and fell out of his chair. This is the lightning shadow spell. Nade offered to show it to him and say it was a ghost, but wizards don't fall for that kind of trick, even though Chiron did. He was afraid not because he was fooled. It was the fear deep inside him that was triggered. Instead of forcing them to believe, showing them proof will bring out their deepest fears. If you change your strategy, not to assert and make them believe, but to first gain their faith and then prove it. An inverse concept. Iruki liked the idea, and Nade hardly kissed Chiron, except that if they show bad magic, even those who believe in the supernatural will abandon their beliefs. Iruki asked Nade if he could make the shadow move even more frighteningly. The boy could certainly do it if he continued to use the lightning shadow. He used it 24 times per second and then achieved a smoother movement. Nade hasn't slept in 3 days. Of course they won't do it the way the guy shows. Iruki asked if they could build the device. Nade had already thought about it, but there was a problem. He could add a program to the device and move the hologram, but if it doesn't respond to humans, who can it scare? But Iruki said he could handle it. They will succeed if they predict people's reactions. Apply the theory of complex systems. After analyzing most possible reactions, they will program them. For example, after they predict that Sharon will look to the left, the ghost on the left will look at him in return. Because everyone's day goes the same way, this was quite possible. But they need a lot of information and devices to store it. But even more importantly, they need a way to transmit an entire program across multiple devices. The energy of Nade's lightning wouldn't be enough. Chiron can use the emission of its photons as a means of transmitting information. There was hope of making the perfect ghost, but Iruki didn't think it would be enough to just scare them with it. Chiron suggested using a psychological technique, so it was decided that Nade would create the device, Iruki would make the program, and Chiron would prepare the photon emission. Iruki thought about it a bit and schematically calculated the required amount of photon emission to send data. He needs 3 times as many as he currently has and needs to hold them for at least 10 minutes. 10 days passed. Nade burst into Istus in hysterics. He put up a notice, and it's fucking hell. It's just a sensation. More than half of the entire academy is supposed to show up. About 17 days before the presentation, all the students were discussing what would happen. Everyone was expecting something super unusual. A girl with pink hair listened to the students' conversations and went to a deserted place where an unknown person was waiting for her. The unknown person asked if it was true that the community of supernatural sciences was going to show something. According to the girl's sources, if the presentation fails, the research laboratory will be returned to the academy. But they don't know for sure whether the group will cease to exist, because the community includes Iruki with savant syndrome, Chiron, who unleashed the dark wizards, and Nade's poverty cannot be dismissed. And yet they are third-rate students. They should worry about what happens later. The war of the Shadow Research Group for the right to become the second owners of Istiaz. Meanwhile, Chiron was training. Something went wrong and he fell to the ground. It was the so-called mental recoil, which is an excessive method to quickly increase magic production. After the maximum willpower is used up, it takes about 12 minutes to recover. Then you need to repeat it until you reach the limit again. It's a stupid way that can put lives in danger. If the teacher found out, she wouldn't sit idly by. But it's not good. The result of Sharon's overworked mentality was that he could use photon emission for 5 minutes, with 7 days left before the presentation. In order to reach his goal of 10 minutes, he had no choice but to continue until he lost consciousness. Sharon's thoughts were interrupted by Nade, who entered the room. The boy was crying and saying that the goal was too much. It was beyond the capabilities of a 5th grader, but Sharon interrupted the boy and told him not to worry. Nade asked Chiron to follow him. When they entered the room, they saw Iruki writing something. He was exhausted. He had bags under his eyes and pieces of cotton wool in his nose. And then Chiron noticed Nade's device. He asked Chiron to test it now. The day of the presentation came. A lot of students had gathered. One of them was Mark Slider, who returned to class today after a 2-month suspension. A girl walked by and gave him a flyer. It was from her that he learned about the presentation. Maria Erlan, who had also returned after a 2-month suspension, approached him. When she saw Chiron's name on the postcard, she asked to take it to look at it. Maria and Mark had studied under Ted during their suspension. More precisely, Mark himself had become attached to Ted and Maria, so they decided to go to the presentation together. Emma and Cyril also came to the presentation, and not only that, but even the first grade students. It was rumored that they were members of a shadow research group called the Golden Fleece. The principal came along with the students, which surprised the teachers. The students had been preparing so diligently for this performance that he could not help but become interested. All the students and teachers took their seats in the audience. The lights went up on the stage, and a young man came on stage and announced that the presentation of the community of supernatural psychic research was about to begin. The presenter was Vice Nide, president of the Community for the Study of Supernatural Psychic Sciences. The topic of their discussion today is spirits. Some people may find what is happening strange, as if so they should be careful when watching. The presenter asked if the students knew what happened before the academy was founded. It happened 520 years ago. Initially, this place was a small village of farmers. However, the world was going through the famous War of Conquest. At that time, people fled from the fighting to the mountains. Of course, civilians and soldiers were no exception. And non-human beings were contacted. These were people possessed by an evil spirit. At this time, Iruki came out in a costume and covered in blood, portraying a man possessed by an evil spirit. All the students in the room were laughing because they recognized the guy. Only Ella was unhappy because she didn't think it was a presentation at all, more like a play. Meanwhile, on stage, Nade continued to tell us that one night a guy was looking for his beloved, and that guy was played by Nade himself. It was as if he came here to hide from the war and lost her. A precious person. Sharon came on stage in a dress and a wig. He played Nade's lover, whose name was Olia. The audience started to laugh again. Meanwhile, the boys hugged each other and talked about their long separation. Their lips began to move to meet each other. The audience froze, but they couldn't kiss, because Nade was attacked by Iruki, dressed as a man possessed by an evil spirit. The lights went out for a minute and then came back on. On the stage, Nade was standing alone, holding a book in his hands. He said that 6 months ago, the source of this story, an old diary, was found while researching the history of the academy. Their research team immediately began to investigate, and the result was a shocking truth. The souls that became evil because they were absorbed by evil spirits wandered around the other world in search of people to possess until today. Midnight, the time when the light disappears. That's when the evil spirits come out. No one had probably seen an evil spirit at midnight, which was not surprising because they only show up to those who want to see them. But with the help of their presentation, they had to be at least a little bit interested. In other words, they all tuned in to the frequency of the soul. Tonight, when the bell strikes midnight, you need to look around. You will probably notice an evil spirit wandering around. Unless you're lucky, of course. That was the end of the presentation. The lights came on in the room. The students were outraged. They shouted that no evidence had been provided. Nothing supernatural had been shown. Emma ran out of the room. She was ashamed. She knew she would be from the moment she got involved with these weirdos. Sina's teacher bowed to the principal and said she would definitely punish the students. But the principal just laughed. He didn't expect anything from a group of supernaturalists. Sina did not understand why the boys did it. When the boys went backstage, they began to cheer because of the audience's reaction. One look is enough to realize that the seed has been planted. The day before, Nade had installed hundreds of hologram projectors throughout the academy. These projectors will be the Iruki program, which involves movements. Back to tonight. After a re-presentation at 5 minutes and 15 seconds to midnight, the boys began to execute their plan. There was no time to start earlier or later. The point was to show them the ghosts at midnight. Nade started to turn on the device. Iruki had to signal when to start. Now it was Sharon's turn. He picked up the ball that was connected to the device and started to emit photons. When Iruki saw the boy's power, he said that in just a month he had increased his magic power by as much as Sharon expected. Sharon felt as if he was pouring water into a bottomless bowl. In the meantime, Nade noticed the emission levels on the device. They were not increasing. Nade started crying and saying that it was his fault, that he was stupid and incapable because his device was not working properly. He kept crying and apologizing for getting the boys involved. He was sorry that he had made them a laughingstock, but Sharon argued with him because they all work hard, sacrificing their own rest. Nade and Iruki had both put their all into this. They were not going to give up, so he decided to use the immortality function. The guys noticed and asked him to stop. There was a great threat that Sharon would disappear, but they could not stop him. Nade started to cry even more and told Sharon that he didn't care about the group. He didn't want to lose him. But Sharon was no longer afraid. Armin said that he would not disappear. The main thing is to remember who you are. Sharon began to emit and the photon level started to go off scale. Iruki started the program. Meanwhile, in the women's dormitory, Maria was sitting with a book. She noticed that it was already midnight and time to go to bed because she had classes tomorrow. She remembered that story about the spirits and got creeped out because they appear at midnight. When she turned her head to the window, she saw a scary spirit that looked like a zombie. At that time, the ghost was approaching Emma, and she threw a vase at it, but it did not stop him. Serial ran into her room and screamed that there were ghosts in the room. All the students started running outside from their rooms and screaming, but no one understood why they were chasing them. Once outside, the high school students decided to attack the ghosts, but they began to disappear. One student noticed a light on the roof of one of the buildings and told the others. No one could understand what was happening. 3 boys were standing on the roof, namely Iruki, Shiran, and Nadi. The latter loudly thanked the students for coming at such a late hour. And then teacher Sina appeared and was outraged by this performance in the middle of the night. She was very scared when she washed her face. Nade said that these were not real ghosts, but only a hologram projector. The students were disappointed. Sina was approached by the principal. She was surprised that he came here, but the principal was positive. He wanted to hear the presentation to the end. Nade went on to say that according to their group's research, spirits do exist. He asked if they now believed in the supernatural. But the students were outraged because ghosts don't exist. The ones they showed were fake. They performed a trick that even a 3-year-old could do. But still, some were curious how they did it. It was clear that the boys had used holographic magic, but it was not clear how the hologram could move in different ways. Lively discussions began. Everyone was interested in how they managed to organize this simultaneously at their academy because it requires a huge amount of data and energy. The high school students were angry that they were led by some 5th graders and even more angry that they did not know how to use the device. The principal asked Xing if she could explain how the boys had used the trick. They had used a sophisticated trick, but not to the point where they could approve their group's activities. The principal added that the trick itself was not important at all. The students kept shouting that ghosts don't exist and there is no connection between fake spirits and the study of the supernatural. Nade realized that the students still didn't believe him because they kept shouting that it was just a performance. He then asked the students why they were still here, why they were running away, and who they were so scared of if no spirits or ghosts existed. The emotions they had just experienced were the essence of the supernatural psychic research community. All of them who do not believe in spirits felt fear as soon as they saw the ghost, so the seeds of doubt that say maybe spirits and ghosts are real are inside them. They just used it as a guide. They may not know if they exist, but they are exploring this doubt. That's the purpose of research. Because they all showed them this doubt, they proved the importance of their research group. This concluded the presentation of the Community of Research on Supernatural Psychic Sciences. The guy thanked the students. The students started shouting. They were thrilled. If their tricks were as unusual, the students were ready to fall for them again and again. Watching the boys on the roof, the principal asked the teachers where they came from and where they were going. Someone explores doubts and shows everyone. The principal thought it was a very meaningful presentation. The other teachers had no objections. Teacher Sina announced that the teachers had made a decision to identify the presentation as a community study of supernatural psychic sciences. Instead, she suspended the boys for 3 days. The boys started hugging and rejoicing that they had succeeded. Teacher Sina was only angry, as she thought the boys had not heard that they had been suspended. Serial was swamped with boys. Everyone wants to do something like this, to see the world just once. Emma stood there at first with a disgruntled face, but then she thought it was very unexpected that while she was studying until she was exhausted to graduate from the academy, Sharon was spending her time on useless fun. She was a little jealous. Meanwhile, unknown young men standing away from the crowd of students were discussing the fact that they would not get ISTUS. Their ant language research group was out of the game. Another guy said that they were only in the 5th grade. Was that really a reason to run away? Although the boys are about to enter the senior class, one unidentified person advised the other to graduate this year so that he wouldn't have to face Chiron, Iruki, and Nade next year. A 1st grade boy asked them to stop fighting and not to draw attention to themselves. He suggested that they wait for the right moment and behave calmly because it would backfire. Their lively conversation was noticed by Sina's teacher who was passing by. When she noticed them, she thought that these rascals from the shadow group had already gotten bored. The principal made a little photon emission and he liked it very much. Even he, who specializes in light, can't help but be fascinated. He admired Chiron because he had accomplished a difficult task. For now, he decided to keep his fingers crossed because he felt that this kid might achieve what he wanted. After the performance, the boys lay on the grass. Nade wondered if Chiron was okay, because he was risking his life now with this prank. Iruki said that he was the best, and Nade picked him up and shouted that if Chiron hadn't used the immortality function, everything would have been ruined. In order to withstand the immortality function, he used a form of defense. Iruki believed that Chiron would achieve a lot in life. Chiron was outraged that the boys only praised him. It was not right. Iruki predicted the behavior of the entire academy, and Nade managed to create a huge number of devices. Iruki called it frog in the well. It's a Chinese idiom that refers to someone who can't see beyond their nose, a person with a narrow outlook. Nade asked if he should apply to the graduate school. Iruki said yes, because they were going to graduate together. He was sure that when they went out into society, they would find a lot of interesting things to do. Nade held out his hand and asked the boys to promise that they would be together until the end. Iruki even offered to come up with a slogan for their group, but they decided to postpone it for now. Together, they will become the best sorcerers. The next morning, Iruki and Nade came to Chiron's room. They saw that the boy was still sleeping and started to wake him up, because today was their first suspension. But Chiron did not respond to them. Apparently, he was very exhausted. He couldn't move a millimeter, as if it were sleep paralysis. He was stuck in this nightmare again, holding on to infinity. The movement of the stars to their final exact destination, the immense flickering light again awaited him. He always woke up at this point. Something had changed. Finally, he managed to open his eyes. Chiron realized that his dream had changed, probably because of last night. But was it really so? He found a note from the guys by the bedside. They wrote that they were going to the casino, but Chiron didn't want to go with them. He began to think about what he could do with the 3 days he was suspended from school. His first thought was to go home to visit his parents, but he immediately realized that he would have to explain why he was suspended. He decided not to do that. Chiron put on a nice new suit and tie. Standing in front of the mirror, he remembered that he had wanted to do one thing for a long time. When he stepped away from the mirror, his glowing spirit remained standing where he had been standing. After a while, Chiron was standing outside the store. He had been studying continuously for the past few years, and now he wanted to buy a book. He remembered when he was a child, a woman in a bookstore wouldn't let him look at a book. But when Chiron entered the store, the woman who met him was very happy to see him. She asked what brought such a nice customer in, if he was a supplier. But he was just here to buy a book. The saleswoman allowed him to look at the books and choose one, and Chiron realized that she did not recognize him. He finally chose a book called Raise a Dragon to Defeat the Demon Lord. He was happy because he had finally bought his own novel, all thanks to the fact that he had been saving the allowance that the Ojent family had sent him. Suddenly, a girl ran up to Sharon and took his arm. He did not recognize her and was shocked, but she didn't introduce herself. She called the other boys and barked that it was really Chiron. When the boys came closer, Chiron remembered one of them. His name was Altor. Then he remembered the girl. Her name was Lumina. The boys approached Chiron and started looking at his costume. He had changed so much. He was dressed like a nobleman. Altor, who now worked as a teacher of village children, he said he hadn't seen Chiron for a long time and asked what he was doing now. They had asked Uncle Vincent, but he wouldn't tell them anything. Chiron thought for a long time whether to lie to them or not, but realized that sooner or later they would find out. If he lied now, they would be hurt, and he said that he had been studying magic all his life. From an early age, Altor was brave and had a good physique. Being an outstanding child, he easily became a teacher. It could be said that overconfidence was his downfall. In a small mountain village surrounded by many dangers, there was one most important rule, and it was this: you must listen to your teacher. The teacher protects the village and everyone follows him. This was the secret of survival in a small mountain village. As a child, Lumina always protected Chiron from the attacks of the Altor. She would constantly beat him when he would take away the boy's books. His childhood friends were amazed to hear about Chiron's training and asked to see him use real magic, but Chiron didn't know how to use it yet. He said he was new to the academy and it was forbidden to do anything outside the academy. When Altor saw the book in Chiron's hands, he reached out to snatch it from his hands and see what the boy was reading. Not responding to Chiron's request not to take the book, the boy continued to do so, and eventually the book began to fall. But Chiron managed to grab it before it hit the floor, and at that moment, he recently lost consciousness. Lumina started scolding Altor because they were no longer children, and he tried to take the book away from the boy again, as before. But Chiron said that everything was fine and there was no reason to worry. Lumina invited Chiron to come with them and eat something tasty. It would be better than just standing around in the middle of the street. Besides, they were going to have a party to celebrate the sale of all the goods in Lumina's stall. Chiron agreed, since he had nothing to do anyway. A modest carriage pulled up to them. Altor took Chiron and put him in the carriage. He was very surprised that the man could be so light. Chiron was equally surprised because since they hadn't seen each other, Altor had become a monster, and he knew how to run a business. He would probably be the boss of the village in the future. Later in the afternoon, they reached the village restaurant. They ordered a lot of food and beer. The guys asked a lot about his studies at the academy, and Chiron told them that his studies took up most of his time, and he had no time for nonsense and girls. Altor asked what plans Chiron had for the future after graduation, because his Uncle Vincent was providing for their family now, and in the future, Chiron would be doing it and he would need to get married. He realized that there were no guarantees that he would be able to complete his studies. He was so focused on his studies that he never even thought about it. His friends were already helping his parents run the business, and his dad was doing the hard work alone, and when he was useful. Altor saw that his words upset the boy, so he offered to compete in arm wrestling. They used to be interested in it when they were kids, but to maintain Altor's reputation, Chiron often gave in. So that Altor wouldn't fall face first into the mud, the boy decided to hold on to the last and lose at the last moment. They put their elbows on the table and bet that the loser would pay for dinner. The competition began, and in less than a minute, Chiron fell to the floor, exhausted, which meant he had to pay for dinner. He took a bag of gold coins out of his pocket, but accidentally dropped it, and all the coins scattered. Lumina asked him why he was carrying such a huge amount of money. There were 5 gold coins in the bag, which was the salary of a peasant for 1 month. Altora got angry and blushed. He shouted that his friends had made a mess because of 5 coins. When he calmed down a bit, one of the boys said that a predator had appeared in the mountains and there were no wild animals there anymore. The father of one of the boys told him that it was a cow bear, the one that does nothing but eat. Chiron added that he had also heard this from his father, but he did not understand why the bear would live here. It seemed to him that it should live in the north. Lumina suggested that it was mating season, and that's why he was here. Although he was not visible, he must be hiding deep in the mountain. Altor thought about it for a while and offered to catch him. In this way, they will help the village, and if it is a cow bear, there is no need to bother the adults. One of the boys told us that last time Altor hunted a black bear on his own. Chiron was impressed by the boy's strength. He also agreed to go hunting with his friends. It was not in his plans, but it was supposed to be fun. Early in the morning, Lumina came to wake Chiron up. They got dressed and took their weapons for hunting. They went into the forest and started setting traps. Chiron was surprised at how quickly they managed to cope with the nets and traps, but it was Altor who did the really difficult things. He noticed a claw mark on one of the trees and immediately realized that the bear was here. He told his friends to explore the area, and if anyone came across him, to let him know. They split into groups and went in different directions. Chiron went with Lumina. After wandering for a while, he realized that he could use the spirit state to find the bear. He entered the state of the spirit behind the bushes and noticed something. He walked closer to the bush to push it aside and see what was there. Altor ran up to him and started shouting. He was outraged that Chiron had left the area without warning him, because he could have put them all in danger. Altor felt something touching his legs, and when he looked around, he saw a pile of animal corpses. Chiron suggested that we leave, because he didn't think it was a cow bear. He wanted to tell the adults and restrict access to the mountain. But Altor was furious. He was surprised that Chiron gave up without even seeing his opponent. He started shouting that he was the teacher here and he was the one who could give instructions. Because Chiron was like that even as a child, don't accept his leader, take him for a fool. At this time, something moved in the bushes behind Chiron. Everyone froze for a few seconds and then took their bows and arrows. A second later, a huge hairy creature appeared from behind the trees. It was a monster. An unknown creature that did not obey the rules of evolution. Chiron had seen one in a book called a wolf. Altor shot an arrow at it, but the creature dodged it. An intelligent monster. When the monster smashed the tree, Altor realized that he had to run away. The forces were not equal, but Chiron remained standing. He aimed an arrow at the monster, which was moving right at him. Chiron shot the arrow straight at the creature's head, but his skin was so thick that it just flew away. The boy realized that everyone would survive only if he distracted it. Altor ordered everyone to take off all their heavy things to run faster, but time stopped. Lumina noticed this and asked what he was planning to do. He could not leave Chiron. At this time, the monster was approaching him from behind. Seeing the creature's shadow, he thought that Chiron was dead, so he told him to go with them. Tears appeared in his eyes. If only he had listened to Chiron when he told him to go back. And then a beam of light appeared out of nowhere and struck the monster. Lumina saw Chiron in the distance, telling his friends to run. Some of them stopped in shock, for they had never seen magic before. But the monster did not die from the blow. It continued to attack. Altor stood in one place, his body refusing to move. As soon as the creature tried to attack Lumini, Chiron took hold of his mane and mounted him. In his mind, he said, "Teleportation," and in a second, he and the wolf were gone. As they flew, he thought about what to do next. He wanted to stop the photonization and make the monster fall from a height, but in the same second, it would pierce him with its claws. In this position, it would be impossible to throw him. He's wearing the monster now, and there's no inertia. If only he had a way to make it fall. To create inertia, you need something that has gravity, something that breaks symmetry, something that he touched on in his dream, the nameless knowledge of omniscience. The key point of all this is mass. The emptiness he saw in his dream, the world of broken symmetry. If this is like the birth of the world and is the beginning of existence, since the broken symmetry, he could give mass to his photons. At that moment, the monster flew off and hit the mountain with great force. Chiron watched it for a few minutes, making sure that it was a meter long. He finally realized that it was. The knowledge that the universe was born after the symmetry was broken, nameless knowledge, is a mechanism that gives objects mass. If you use it, you can give it to light too. But still, such a dangerous monster. Why did it appear in the mountains? Chiron asked himself. After all, it was a wolf, and they do not act alone. When Chiron realized this, a huge herd of angry wolves was already approaching his friends, with an abyss behind them. Altor ordered them to jump into the abyss while he ran in the other direction to distract the wolves. There was no other choice. They had to escape to tell the adults so that their sacrifices would not be in vain. At this time, Chiron arrived. Everyone was very happy to see him because they thought he was dead. He apologized for making them worry and said that he would deal with them himself. Altor had asked him to run away, but now Chiron was going against the rule. Chiron entered the state of the spirit and gathered the photons in his hand, adding mass to the photon emission. As soon as one of the wolves approached, he shot it with light. This is his magic. He did it. He managed to hit it with several beams of light at the same time and kill several wolves at once, but still it was not enough. Another wolf was approaching, a little bigger than the other. He hit it with the light, but the beast remained alive. Only its eye was damaged. Chiron realized that his strength had decreased. His friends told him to run away, but he waited until the wolves were closer. There was only one way to defeat them all, but he wasn't sure he could do it. He needed to keep his balance in the swift stream. As the angry beasts approached, the guy stole a bit of light from the beasts, but he couldn't keep the energy. If he continued like this, his consciousness would dissipate. He remembered how he had released the energy at the moment of their presentation, so he decided to do the same now. The beam of light swept away all the wolves in a wave, and a ditch formed on the ground. One of the wolves got up on its paws. It looked Chiron directly in the eyes. When they met Chiron's eyes, Chiron mentally asked him to leave and never come back here again. It worked, and the wolves left. Chiron fell backwards, exhausted. He asked everyone to leave. The time for the hunt was over. And it was evening. Chiron went outside, sat on the grass, and admired the stars. Altor approached the boy and asked him when he had time to go outside, because he was sleeping after the hunt. Chiron got up for the first time in a long time and wanted to look at the stars. It had been a long time since he had had such a peaceful sleep. He couldn't remember the last time he hadn't had a nightmare or something supernatural. He had become such a dead sleep, and his friends did not leave his side until he woke up. They're all busy cooking now, and they're very lucky to have everyone back from the hunt except for Lumina. She hit herself when she fell. Tomorrow they and the adults will finish the job. They could make a good living selling the monster's fur and teeth. Altor asked Chiron what these beasts were called. He replied that they were wolves. He had heard that their calls were especially valuable. The boys were silent for a few minutes, but then Altor apologized to Chiron. The boy was surprised because he had nothing to apologize for. But Altor added that he was jealous of him. He was jealous because Chiron had a dream that he was doing everything for. Altor asked him to promise that Chiron would make his dream come true. The next morning, Chiron said goodbye to his friends. He had some research to do, so it was time to return to the academy. Lumina hugged him and asked him to come back to the academy. She threatened him that he would get it in the ass in the future if he pretended not to know her when he became a wizard. With that, the friends said goodbye and Chiron left. He went straight to Istis's place. Entering the laboratory, he took out his notebook and tried to remember how Nade had explained the correct way. He had to pay attention to the number in the corner on the ceiling and the color of the door. He approached the yellow door. It was the fifth one. He had an equation written in his notebook. He had to substitute x, y, and z and use the equal values. This is the main key to Istis. Nade told him that one of the founders had savant syndrome, and it was he who created this equation. When he first showed it to Iruka, he said it was a really good equation. Meanwhile, Chiron was approaching the door. He could hear the boys arguing. Sharon tore the door open. As well as being able to find his way to the lab, he also realized that it was through his roots, his precious connections, and all the moments he shared that he was able to find his way back to the lab. He finds his way step by step. Chiron immediately dragged the boys to the training ground. At first, the boys thought he just wanted to show them how to emit photons, but it was something else. Usually, photons are emitted outward, but now they seem to be gathering from the inside. When Sharon launched the beam, it was so powerful that it made a hole in the rock. Nade couldn't understand how it was possible to make such a hole using only light. He thought it was real magic. Chiron explained that it was magic he'd created. He called it a photon gun. Iruki knew that photon fusion must be incredibly difficult. He asked Chiron if it was a spell. They chose the nearest restaurant outside the academy. After ordering food, Chiron began to tell him that he had added mass to the photons. It was amazing, adding mass to a particle without it. Nadezhda's head was spinning from Chiron's story. After using this nameless knowledge, the anxiety disappeared. In addition, he discovered the meaning of the nightmares that haunted him. If he built a theory based on this knowledge and shared it, it would be a sensational discovery for the magical community and the world. Although knowledge of the theory did not guarantee that a magician could use a photon gun, even with omniscience, it would be difficult to understand omnipotence. Chiron had a request for the boys. He would like to research this further, but since school was on vacation, he had no access to the library. He couldn't go to the library for Gentry, so he hoped the boys would take him there. Nade asked why Chiron could not go there. He thought for a few minutes whether to tell the truth, whether the boys would be friends with them as before. But if he left it like this, they would not be able to become my real friends. And he said that he was not a nobleman, but a commoner. Someone left him in a stable, and then his current parents found him and raised him. His father is a simple hunter. There was silence for a few seconds, but Narsheti Nade said that Chiron's face was so gloomy only because of that. Iruki realized that Chiron had only started studying this year. In just 3 months, he had jumped to the 5th grade and won it in front of the entire academy, not to mention dating a brilliant sorceress. Nade slammed his hand over Iruki's mouth and said they weren't interested in social status. Chiron started crying and exhaled with relief. He thanked the guys. Iruki wondered if Emma knew about his status. Chiron told him how they met when they were children. Nade was so surprised he wanted to know everything in the smallest detail. Let's fast forward 5 years. In the capital of the kingdom of Tormia, in the slums, 2 grown men were chasing a boy because he had stolen their food. He ran as fast as he could and finally reached his hiding place. In the room, a girl was lying on the floor. He went to her and said that he had brought real bread and now she was not dead. When he turned around, there were 3 strong men standing over them. It was bad. A place that should never have been exposed was exposed. The men started kicking him in the face. One of the men took his sister Aaron across his shoulder. She was very sick and did not move. The boy cried and started shouting that he would kill everyone if they did anything to his sister. Suddenly, he saw a dark purple smoke appear in the room, gradually enveloping everything. This smoke pierced the men, and blood began to ooze from them. The boy did not understand what was happening. When the men were completely gone, he got up and saw his sister lying in a black puddle. He went to her to check if she was breathing. At that time, a man with a stick appeared in front of him. His face was not visible, his eyes were glowing red, and he had a terrible smile. He asked the boy if magic was fun. Back to our time. In the evening, the boy watched the museum from the roof of a neighboring house. The windows were panoramic, so it was not difficult. There were a lot of guards there, but no less relics, all of them of high archaeological value. But their goal was the core of the mana control system, the Dragon's Heart artifact. It is located in the center of the steel room on the 3rd floor and is protected by 15 guards. However, before they can obtain the artifact, namely the core of the mana control system, they cannot use the spirit state inside the room. This boy was the same boy who stole the food. He was even named Canis. He flew to the museum and broke the windows with the help of black light and got inside. Using magic, he neutralized the guards, although it was impossible. He quickly retreated to the core of the system's control system. The guards continued to run after him, but as soon as they approached, their strength was gone. The boy's sister, Aaron, entered the room with the core. She asked why her brother hadn't killed anything. There was an explosion behind them. The man shouted that he didn't know how they had bypassed the mana control system and used magic, but it was over. He was going to destroy them. But when the man threw a fireball at them, a crater formed, but Canis and Armin were unharmed. A dark light was coming from them, and the man realized that they were dark sorcerers. They filled everything with black light and disappeared along with the mana control core. There was no sign of teleportation, so they must still be here. As the guards examined the building, the man wondered how these rather young people had managed to bypass the mana control system and steal the core. Besides, it's light out. How could they have used dark magic? Only one person, only one sorcerer, is capable of controlling such magic. Darkness that absorbs light. The Archmage Viltor Arcane, who used his fame to plunge the kingdom into chaos with shadows that light cannot erase. But he should have been dead 40 years ago. How can anyone use his magic? Is the transference to the mountain slums. That's where Canis and Armin went after the robbery. The boy told the master that they had brought the last ingredient. The old man was in a large flask with many different tubes attached to his body. Canis approached the flask and inserted the core of the system into the free space. With it, he would be able to restore his honor as army hag. The flask glowed with light. The man stood up and said that he had been waiting for 40 years to meet the bastard who had stolen his power. He added that the man who had done it was a teacher named Alphas Milt. We fast forward 40 years. Everything in the building is on fire, and so is Viltor. He asked Alpheus to give the project back because it was not only his and it was his life's work. But Alpheus just walked away, leaving the man to burn in the fire. Now that 40 years had passed, the man was ready for revenge. Canis and Armin bowed before the man and thanked him for saving them and giving them great power. They were his favorite students, but they had to be careful. Blinded by greed, he committed murder. When the students left, Viltor was alone in his room. It was raining outside. He walked over to a shelf of books and pulled one. The shelves slid apart and a hidden door opened. In the room that opened, there was a painting hanging over the fireplace. Viltor said, "Don't forgive me." At the same time, a scientific conference was being held in the capital, Bashkir, organized by the kingdom's Teachers Association. Teacher Ted also attended. Now he understood why all the teachers were putting off attending this meeting. How could they possibly socialize for 3 days in a row? He wanted to go home. In fact, the conference was long over and the teachers would still continue the discussion during the evening reception. The only reason he's still here is to talk to Reina Ogene. She is a member of a prestigious group of 99 artists. A court pianist who is a student of the composer Melody Merchant is not annoyed, even though people keep hovering around her. If only Sina's teacher were half as kind. His thoughts were interrupted by Reina looking at Ted. She walked over to him and asked if he was a teacher from the Alphas Academy of Magic. the main estate of the Agents, also located in Creus. Ted was embarrassed. He didn't even think they would have a chance to talk. Reina asked how Shirin was doing. Ted switched to teacher mode and began to praise the boy. He praised his abilities and his aptitude for learning. He also added that Shirin gets along well with his classmates and has a girlfriend. She is known as the most charming student at the academy. Reina was sincerely happy for Shirin. Meanwhile, Ted continued to say that they didn't have to worry about the boy. He didn't want to brag, but the Alphaz Academy of Magic was a prestigious place, a recognized kingdom. Ted decided to seize the moment and added that their meeting was fateful and suggested that Reina go back to Creus tomorrow and have lunch together. But instead, Reina invited him to her performance in Bashuk, but after the recent events, she was a little scared to go there. Inferno was attacked. A B-class prisoner escaped. The perpetrator is an unidentified dark wizard, and the capital is practically under martial law. Ted was confused and asked the girl for more details. She mentioned that she had heard that the perpetrator was a gray-haired old man. Did not listen to Reina and said he had to go. He ran as fast as he could because he realized that the dark sorcerer had escaped. Everything pointed to him. Last night in Inferno, there was a huge fire in the penitentiary. Canis and Armin, along with Viltor, were killing everyone in their path. Canis remembered how the man had taught him as a child. Dark magic has two features, absorption and assimilation. Darkness absorbs energy and assimilates it into itself. Darkness that has received its mental power can have a small physical impact. However, darkness cannot defeat light. The man praised the boy a lot. The Archmage Arcane had saved him and his sister from hell, so he studied hard. In Inferno, the darkness did not spare anyone. Armin asked her brother to stop because this place had nothing to do with the master. But the boy didn't care. In his opinion, all he had to do was trust the master. Their master does not do stupid things. They entered the room with the prisoners. One of them approached a man to introduce himself. His name was Kraken, the Night Cat. Viltor looked at his hand, which he held out, and said that he thought the Narchetti would enjoy fishing, but only small fish were caught. The boys were outraged by what the man said and decided to throw themselves at him. Suddenly, the room became very dark and two walls began to approach them. In a few seconds, no one could get out. The men were crushed by the walls. Behind one of the columns was a man with a tattoo of a bird on his arm. He wanted to hide his presence, but Viltor found him. The man had handcuffs on his hands. He asked them why they were doing this. The man suggested that it was to go against the kingdom. There was no answer, and the man picked up a chain with an iron ball at the end and tried to hit the Archimandrite. He had no feeling at all that he had hit the man, as if he had absorbed the force of the blow. Suddenly, Wilter said that he had passed, but the man did not understand what he was talking about. He hadn't signed up for any kind of casting. The Archmage felt that the man was driven by money. He said he was giving him an opportunity to make money. Let's go back to Teacher Ted. He was already rushing in the carriage and asked the coachman to go faster. But no matter how fast they went, they would not arrive in Creus until tomorrow morning. Last night, Arcane attacked Inferno, so next he would come to avenge what happened 40 years ago. I had to tell the teachers as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the man with the tattoo on the year Lucas, Canis, and Armin went to the Magic Academy to complete an assignment.